Looks like we're live.
Oh, yep, we are live. Perfect. Okay. So it happened exactly as I expected it would. I hit the button and we just kicked off without me being ready. All good. Anyway, hello out there, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about game development, answer a bunch of questions, talk about, the thing that's in the title real quick, and then, I don't know, just have fun with other stuff. So, hello out there, everybody. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I guess we'll just kind of get started. So last week, we'd talked a little bit about Monster Hunter, and I think me and Jason both admitted we hadn't played it. So we both kind of agreed to jump in and give it a go. And I know, like, I did, and I know Jason did a bit too, and had a blast. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that first, if that's good with you guys.
Sure. I'm always willing to talk Monster Hunter.
Yeah, so I mean, I grabbed Monster Hunter World, and I played, I think, about 8, maybe 10 hours in. I was 8 hours in when
Good.
my wife noticed, and I played a little bit after that when she wasn't paying attention, right? But I was having a blast with it. It was it seemed very familiar. I think I may have played an old version of it on the PlayStation a long time ago, or something very similar.
Maybe it released on console before it hit PC.
Okay.
What weapon did you end up playing with the most?
So I tried a couple. I did the sword a bit, the great sword one. I tried the bow shield, the bow gun one, the one that was like a gun and a sword. I hated that thing. I used the hammer a ton because I was able to like do a bunch of combos, and
Hammer's fun.
Yeah, I was able to just do a bunch of cool moves and like actually practice quite a bit with that. And I tried out a bow a little bit, and I didn't understand why anybody would use that. So I switched back to the hammer again. I generally went with the hammer as like my default, though. At the most,
hammer's pretty fun.
Is there another one that's really good to use in that game?
Well, I mean, good to use is it's all. The great thing about the game series is that they offer so many great weapon varieties and different gameplay styles within that. But if you understand like the core controls, you can kind of step into any weapon. Range and melee, obviously, you need to grok the difference there. But once you kind of get that, it's generally fine. But hammer is like super fun, especially in World where mobility was key for them, because the previous games, posture and like stopping and sheathing and unsheathing were less fluid intentionally. So that making a decision to unsheath or do this or that, whatever, or sheath, were all things that you had to consider because there were consequences if you made that decision at the wrong time. So World like really opened up mobility a bunch, and then Rise has actually made it even more fun. And so hammer back in the day was like super important because certain monsters had like hard shells and you can only like really crack them with a hammer. Same thing like cutting off tails, you can only do that with a bladed thing. And also with hammers, you can knock things out. You get stars over their head and all kind of crazy stuff and create opportunities for everybody. But if you were a hammer guy before World, like in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, you like, it's very slow going. Same with Greatsword. Greatsword's slow. It's still kind of slow, but the mobility's helped out a little bit.
That one was very slow, but it was fun. It was like
but Greatsword,
giant attacks.
Greatsword is crazy because if you can size up the like big overhead chop, like you do so much damage. It's nuts.
Yeah, I saw that too. That was like the most damage I got on anything.
Yeah. It's like the game is definitely like appeals to so many different play styles, but its core gameplay is just fun. So if you don't like one weapon, you just go to another one. Glaive is my son and my probably favorite in World, because Glaive has kind of a meta progression with the insect, the kinsects.
That's what those
manage all that stuff. And Glaive is fun because you can like, obviously it's like super acrobatic, jumping up in the sky, flipping thing all around, feeling like a ninja, all that crazy stuff. But I mean, all the weapons are fun. Lance used to be crazy because it's literally, you're just like a castle with a stick standing there. But the mobility stuff again made Lance more fun in World, because they got like a little vault. And then Gun Lance is just a nuts weapon, which is a really creative weapon. Probably my favorite weapon is Switch Axe, just because Switch Axe is super fun. But also, and then I forget the axe. I forget what that one is called.
I didn't play with an axe. I don't know.
It's I forget what it is. It's the one that turns to a sword shield and then it turns to an axe. I forget what it's called. But that one's like super powerful too. But it's like also fun because you basically like build up little dots, and then you like basically kind of plug it in, and then you just do some crazy power hit. It's really a lot of fun, especially when you're kind of like working well with the other 300s or something like that. But yeah, the game is just like the game series in general has like really focused on just kind of synergistic gameplay with, you know, a lot of animation locking and stuff like that. You know, beating up a monster feels really good. But the one thing that's really great about the entire series is just if you just look at kind of the ecosystem, like you could watch Monster Hunter World, you could watch the creatures interact with each other. They stop, they eat, they take shits. Like if you're standing behind Diablos in the desert and he doesn't notice you, you'll just see him just like, you know, drop shit on the ground. And obviously dung is useful because, you know, it's used to like make creatures go away and stuff like that. But they all interact with it. They go places, they eat, they do these things, they just have these like behaviors that are stimulating, you know, kind of a real life ecosystem. And that's just been true throughout the whole series. And thankfully they've like made sure to keep that, you know, as a part of the game as they've gone more and more towards crafting being less of a thing, because obviously like carving all that stuff is important for weapons, but it's also important for all of your expendables. And they've kind of shied away from needing expendables a whole lot, which makes me a little bit sad. But I get with World, you know, I get that they were trying to make the game more accessible to more people. So there's some give and take there, but the ecosystem of the game, like you could literally just kind of watch and have a camera in on a map and just watch, you know, as things come in the world and out, and just, you know, Devil Joe may come in and just randomly just destroy a monster, then go out somewhere and just eat like a small piece of meat. And then like,
I did notice that with the birds. Whenever I was killing things, and the birds would come down and start eating immediately.
Yeah,
and then they get chewed away as we were fighting. Yeah,
it's pretty nuts. And like they've like grown it so much since the original Monster Hunter. It's like it just keeps getting better and better. And obviously graphic quality goes up, so you can see the monsters just come to life more. So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Monster Hunter. I've always been a huge fan of Monster Hunter because when you succeed in Monster Hunter, it is so exhilarating and it feels so good. And I've had many fights where it's like down to the wire. I got to go grab some herbs from a thing, make a potion just so I can heal myself because I'm out of potions. And my weapon is like, isn't fully sharp. And back in the day, whetstones weren't infinite. So you had to like keep a stock of whetstones. So you could run out of whetstones. You'd have to go find whetstones in the environment, stuff like that. Like that whole feeling. And then when you just finally like get that kill, and the monster kills over, or you trap it and put it to sleep, like it just feels so good. And that particular feeling has like stayed consistent throughout the entire series. So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I could geek out about Monster Hunter forever.
Yeah, I find it interesting how there are a lot of big, long fights, right?
Mm-hmm.
That change place, you change location, and just running around chasing after the guys and hunting them down. Like that a lot, and I really like just the big amount of variety. Like that, you have that core game, and the core gameplay is like go fight monsters, but there's so many different ways that you can do it, and it seems relatively reasonable the way that they've put the whole thing together, like code wise, and like building a game, like building something like that. I would bet that they made it relatively easy for them to just add in cool new weapons when the hard part is coming up with like what's going to actually be fun and interesting there. But getting it all working seems really interesting. And I really also like the UI, like pop-ups and information when I switch weapons. So I get a new weapon, I had no freaking clue how to use the thing. But the second I'm using it and I'm actually needing to do it, it's showing me like what the combos are, what the buttons are, kind of right up there on the screen, so that I didn't have to go into a training mode to figure it out, which was really, really handy.
I was gonna say something and I lost it. Damn it! All right. That's something else.
I was just
you had the answer. I was gonna make
there's a lot of stuff, and I liked the the collecting and harvesting part of it, like going to get the body parts to make new armor and weapons and stuff, where it made sense like as a game, and it was another like really cool implementation of I thought like a crafting harvesting system.
Yeah, I was gonna say like so they have an MMO in Japan only that has like a roster of monsters that's crazy. And if you've ever if you take the time to like find out how they like mocap the monsters and stuff, it's pretty crazy because it's just human beings running around and doing stuff like these big monsters. So it's just kind of cool that they bring this stuff to life. And people who have been playing the series a bunch, like they're all the ones that always come back, Rathalos, Rathian, all these monsters that are kind of key to the series. It's always fun to see them, how they've changed throughout the engine changes and the different releases. I don't know, like I said, Monster Hunter is great. It is a great series. It's a solid series. They've curated it super well. They've definitely modernized it in a way that's like rarely done super well for an old IP. So yeah, I love Monster Hunter, and like Rise. I'm playing a bunch of Rise. And like I said last week, like it runs so smoothly on a system that obviously isn't up to spec in comparison to something like a PS4 Pro or a PS5 or something like that. And Rise, it's a lot of fun. I'm having more fun with it than World because Rise brings in some of the older school philosophy. So I think they've World is for everybody, basically. Like they've accepted, hey, like this is a thing that's worldwide. A lot of people are playing Monster Hunter because of this iteration of it. It's like FF6, FF7. Like the visual upgrade for FF7 brought a bunch of people to Final Fantasy as a product because 6 was more old school and more hardcore as far as the mechanics and systems and stuff like that, and a little bit more complicated. But 7 is just this huge graphical leap. It's on the PS1, all those things. So a lot of people came into it, and obviously that is proven out as far as the number of fans and just how much they've invested in that particular release of FF. With World, it's just like, hey, this is everything. We got millions of people playing it. We're good. Rise, you can tell, is kind of an ode to the more old school fans, but they incorporated so much World stuff that was like super positive that the experience for me is great. Because in the old stuff, there's like the notion of like personal progression, personal storyline progression, and online progression. In World, they just kind of merge that stuff together. Even though like all the tracking and all that stuff that you do to progress through your personal story, you can do that with other people. Whereas in older Monster Hunters, you had like you had like a town story, journalist, a town that you're helping defend against some big bad in the end. And that's like your personal story. So that progression is all you. The nice thing about that is that if you invest in that by yourself, you become better at the game. And then when you go online, you are already a trained, seasoned hunter. Because generally the way that the story would link online to personal is that you're kind of going off outside of the village to just be the seasoned hunter helping other places. So the thing that I really liked is that when I invested in my story, I unlocked certain features and stuff like that that weren't represented online because I hadn't unlocked them yet. And so it kind of compelled me to do my own story, and I would get better at certain monsters and stuff like that. And then when online had exclusive monsters, those monsters had similar behaviors, something like that, to like their different iterations. So I would already be practiced in fighting them, and then I can like see the new stuff and react to it. So with Rise, they have they've kept the story separate. So I need to spend my own time investing in that story and stuff like that, which I really dig. But otherwise, Rise has like this whole focus on like wall running and using I forget what they're called, these flies that like shoot up in the air and you dangle on them and you like run up walls. Then you obviously have a dog companion that's a mount, so you can ride on your dog and like jump off it and all stuff, and they can jump up walls and do all this crazy stuff. So they've kind of expanded the NPC companion stuff, and for the first time, so in Monster Hunter World, if you have 2 people playing together, then their palicos are out with them. If you had a third person, no one had a pet. And then of course 4 people with no one had a pet. With Rise, you can have 2 pets, but once you're online, everyone has at least one of their pets, which is the dog, because the fact is you can jump on it and the riding of the dog is a part of gameplay that fits with the game. So it's the first time that having 3 people didn't feel like a penalty when it came to that. Yeah, so Rise is like really good, but I think if you're like a big World fan, it may feel a little weird because they've kind of like moved it back to some of the old school philosophy, but it's still fantastic. If you like Monster Hunter at all, like, you will still dig Rise.
Yeah, I plan to grab it personally. The funny thing with World is I didn't even realize I was online at first. For like the first 4 hours, I didn't realize I was actually just playing online. I didn't notice. I was wondering, why does it want me to post my quest? I was like, I don't know. Maybe it just translated weird. And I realized later, like, oh no, I'm actually posting it online so people could join it. And, yeah, no realization of what was going on. I was just having fun killing a bunch of monsters. So
there are some like weird, there are some like gameplay changes they made with World and Rise that I'm still kind of iffy about. So like before World, healing with a potion, you would do this thing where you would stop, you would drink, and then you'd like do this, you'd flex. So all that is just saying, I now am going to take a risk for whatever 5 seconds to get a heal. Regardless of the power of the potion, it was always the same amount of time. So obviously you just have to be careful. Like generally you'd sheath and run over to a corner somewhere and hope that the monster doesn't like decide to look at you right when you do that potion. So with World, they made it so you heal, and then the heal was gradual and you could move around with it. And then in Rise, I don't think this is true in World. In Rise, while you're walking around healing, you can actually hold down your sprint button and move faster. I don't think you can do that in World. I think it's a consistent movement. And for me, it was such a drastic change healing wise. And then of course there's all the environment stuff. Rise has a whole lot of environment related buffs. Like they have this whole thing where it's a bunch of extra flies and stuff, and you hit them and you get like these permanent for the mission, like defensive buffs and attack buffs and all this stuff that is kind of kooky. Because before that was like a focus on items you would bring in expendables called demon drugs and armor skin, or I forget the name specifically. So they like really were into the environment stuff. But the one thing that kind of drove me nuts with World initially is just that healing is so easy and less punishing. That the decision to heal is just simple. It's just like, you know what, I'm just going to heal. Like
I just spam the button.
Any huge risk.
I'm getting low. Spam it.
Yeah, and then of course with the vigor wasps and stuff in the World, you just go over, hit one, so it is. Over time, World has become more difficult, or they've introduced more difficult things, because World inherently was just super, super easy, but it was meant to be accessible. So now they have layers of difficulty, and they've done like cross stuff with like Final Fantasy 14 to introduce like new gameplay mechanics, because you're fighting a boss from 14 in World, and they're using Final Fantasy 14 MMO style gameplay stuff for that boss fight. Like you fight Bahamut, and you have to do things you wouldn't normally do in Monster Hunter. And Bahamut's like super, super difficult. So they've had to like basically introduce a layer of difficulty, I think, just to reflect or to, placate, more old school Monster Hunter people, or just people generally looking for more of a challenge, because Monster Hunter World is really, really easy.
It doesn't feel difficult at all.
But either way, it's still the moment to moment is just so fun. It's the same thing I say about like Destiny or Destiny 2. The moment to moment in those games is just so much fun that you can kind of forgive, some of the, glaring flaws that have been in both products, because it's just fun to get in and shoot stuff in the head, and it's just exciting and rewarding to just see something's head blow up and then the gas sounds come off and all this crazy stuff. Like you just feel like really good every time you do it, even though you're probably doing it 3 billion times because you're grinding, doing some stuff. But that's just the nature of games, ultimately.
The one thing that bothered me in there, and you probably didn't experience this, was that I don't know when they did this, but it looks like they added special weapons to make it easier to go through the single player mission.
Ooh.
So like as I was putting together weapons, I was getting and collecting parts of things, and I was like, oh cool, I can now make a weapon from that. And then I look and like there's these guardian weapons, and I can just make those instead, and they're way more damage than anything I can make
Oh.
from the animals and upgrade. So it kind of like killed my motivation or interest in upgrading and making those animal weapons. It's like, or the monster weapons.
Yeah, I didn't.
It said that there were some
not
new
planned.
thing for the campaign mode. I don't know. I guess
Oh,
make it
they're
easier to
trying to get
level up and
people-
go through.
Yeah, they're trying to get people to G rank basically, probably quick. I mean, kind of standard for.
I get the reason for it, but it also has the downside of like making me way less interested in
Yep.
what I think is probably a big part of the game.
Yeah.
They could have just given me like a boost in all of my damage across the board instead of making me stick with a single weapon. Yeah.
Well, they actually give you the ability to make monsters weaker from food. You can actually proc off of one of the food combinations a weakener effect, which will, I think, reduce the max health of the monster you're fighting by, like, I want to say upwards 50%.
Oh wow.
So you can actively like mess with the difficulty. There's obviously a random effect to it, but you can also manipulate food enough to get guaranteed procs off of food, which is another system in a game that's been there forever. Like there's a hyper focus on food and cooking, and the different effects it does. They put a lot of effort into that, and every game has like a different style of food or cooking, or a different chef or things like that all have like a specific personalities to them, which creates obviously a bunch of subquests to go out and get ingredients and things like that, which feels good. This ingredient unlocks this new thing. Oh man, this is awesome. So it is kind of weird that they did that, because I mean,
I thought it was weird. It seemed like it could just be a global option. Like if you want to make it easier, make it easier without forcing you to not use that system. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I've been having a blast with it. So I plan to play the next one too, grabbing Rise and playing through there too.
Yeah, Rise is fun, man.
There was a question about just crafting in general too, and I just wanted to bring it up just because that was like the first thing that like we got to work on together. So, and they're just asking about like and because you worked on Galaxies, I thought it was very appropriate. So what was the best crafting system you've seen since the one in Galaxies?
I mean, that's tough.
Well, you want to just tell everybody what was really cool about the Galaxies crafting? That made it unique for people that don't know, who didn't play
Galaxies crafting was just the biggest thing is that things could permanently go away. You'd create something, and after so many uses or repairs, it was basically gone from the world. And the fact that every item basically had a bunch of sliders that you could craft something within a range. So effectively every item that was made was unique. Every iteration of an item that was made was unique, which was a huge database problem internally. So like being a crafter that was really good really meant something. And obviously because of the way the nature of Star Wars Galaxies, you had to build your own factories and all sort of things. So you manufacture your own stuff. So the more that you manufactured of it, the better you were, more able you were to meet supply demand needs. So just as an experience, I think Galaxy is probably the closest kind of a real life industrial entrepreneurial type experience for anyone who's a serious crafter in an MMO, certainly as a mainstream MMO. Since Galaxies, I mean, me personally, I don't know. I mean, I worked on a big one that I really enjoyed. I mean, EQ2s was involved, but I wouldn't say that it was like super deep.
What about just anything that's come out recently in the last couple of years?
I mean, recently, I think there hasn't been a huge focus on.
Did you play Factorio?
Is that an MMO?
It was that factory game. No, it was not an MMO.
I mean, I assume the question's focused specifically on MMO.
I don't know. Yeah, I was just curious. I was thinking we're talking about Monster Hunter crafting, so
I've seen Factorio, or is it Factorio?
Something like that. I forgot the name now.
Factorium. I haven't
played it myself. I haven't had time. Looks fun.
Yeah, it's Factorio. Yeah, I've played a good few hours of that.
It looked interesting for sure. I think I actually might have added to my wish list when I saw it. But yeah, I haven't played it, unfortunately. Now I feel bad.
Well,
No,
I should find some Unity questions real quick because.
Oh yeah.
Let's see if there's anything in here. Here's another non-Unity question. Salim, do game designers think about programming patterns and architecture?
Yeah. Especially if you're talking to, let me see. So if you're like designing system or something like that, you would talk to software, you talk to programmers about, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Because you don't want to go down a path of, I really want to do this crazy thing, especially if you're a type of person who likes to write at a low level in a GDD, you should engage programmer, or if you just have programming experience or know your code base, you think about that type of stuff. But ultimately, game designers should be speaking to programmers and discussing a potential project or implementation with them.
When you think about patterns in maybe not so much in the programming sense, but in how you're going to implement things, right? Like how you're going to create objects and parent those objects to other objects, or create abilities or actions or whatever the thing is for the specific game or engine. I mean, a lot of time when you're laying out the content, you're thinking of how you're going to lay that out. And I assume, I've seen you do it, but I assume you're often, and most game designers are often, like talking to programmers about how they want to lay it out, make sure that there isn't an easier or better way to do it. And that's usually the case. Like, there's some like little trick that you may not know that makes it even easier. So it's really good to talk about that stuff too. But
and I often build stuff into my implementations that is parameterized. I try to put a bunch of hooks in there so it's easily and modular. And all that obviously requires like thinking about logic in the background, how I'm storing variables, stuff like that. So I tend to approach it from a more programmy point of view, but that's just from experience and knowing people like you and stuff like that, and just general curiosity. Of course, like spending some time learning some programming and just base logic. That's just how my brain thinks.
Yeah, I would assume that you would recommend most game designers try at least a little bit of programming, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Get a little bit under your belt. You don't have to be an expert, just kind of understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun. Grab some code and just take a look and see if you can maybe figure it out just from the way things are named or the way things are like. In a lot of cases, you could just look at something and like, oh, okay, I think this is doing this, and then just ask someone if that is true.
We're switching views so I can read my question and see my face. So this next one.
I think that's generally good advice for anything, by the way. No matter what career you're doing, if you're working with other people, take the time to learn what their job is and like play with it a bit. So I've done stuff from creating my own icons to making videos and editing videos and creating sound design stuff. And even if I don't do it at a professional level, I like to know when I'm looking, like when you ask somebody, can you make me some models? Can you make me some sound? It's really good to know what you're actually asking for, how long it's going to take and how complicated it is. And so if you're willing to spend a few weeks here and there to teach yourself just the basics of each of these different areas, you're going to be a lot better off at knowing when stuff might take longer than expected. And also, if you're hiring contractors, you'll know when people are bullshitting you. Because if you know enough about the job, you'll know how long it takes to do certain things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Just in general, teach yourself as much about what your colleagues are doing as you can. It's going to be valuable in the long run.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, totally agree. Some of the best programmers know design and art really well. So this question,
except when you're working with Jason Wyman, that guy is lame.
I am terrible at art and design, and code.
Terrible in general.
Yes, terrible at everything, except for guilting Salim into talking on stream.
Yes.
All right. This other question that popped up, I think you guys can see it, was about building a custom event system using scriptable objects. What are your experiences with them, and is it worth the effort? I wanted to pop this up because I thought it was interesting, because I literally just uploaded a video about how to do this. right before the stream. I was in the process of, but it's not published yet. But I was doing a video about exactly how to do this and some of the situations that I like this in. I assume you've done something similar before a couple times, Jason.
Yeah. I often find it's a really quick way to prototype something. Like it's very, very easy to get something up and running once you've got the basics of you know, kind of one of those architectured systems that lets you drop in events and dispatch them from from data effectively.
Yeah, I found them to be super helpful for building like separated systems that are just easy to detach and not have code linking them up together, but then still giving designers the ability to go in and create stuff. So for anybody who hasn't used one of these before, you're essentially setting up a way for one object in your game, like any game object, to send out an event that's set up as a scriptable object. So you'd imagine it's down in your project view. It's just this object down there. You're linking to that, and then that can then fire off code on other game objects that could be in a different scene, in the same scene, anywhere that they're just listening for this event. So they're kind of linked through the project view instead of linked in the scene hierarchy, which has a lot of really cool benefits. So it's definitely a useful thing to understand and to learn and to try to figure out how to do. And it's not very complicated. You can get it in 10 minutes. I think the video that I recorded on is like 12 minutes, and it'll teach you everything you need to know how to do it. Or you can read a blog post in 5 and get the same thing.
But yeah, it's especially good for things like if you're doing adding or subtracting health or kind of events that you'd want to fire almost like a command system. But I would just be cautious that sometimes people can end up building their game logic out of events. And this isn't specific to this event system. It's just when it comes to events in general, there's this sort of feeling of power you get when you start architecting your code around events and going, oh, everything's decoupled. I can just subscribe to an event and dispatch an event and subscribe to another event. And all of a sudden you realize your code doesn't exist in the code anymore. There's no line of code that says, if this happens, do this. What's happened instead is the logic lives in the interplay of events, subscribing to events, subscribing to events. And that's cool and it's modular, but it's dangerous because it's not written down anywhere. And that logic is easy to break as soon as one event unsubscribes from something. And oftentimes it's not documented. So if some piece of behavior breaks and people are like, how did this work again? I don't know, find the right object, find the right event and hook them together and hope you can reconnect it back to the way it used to be. So when it comes to events should be used disproportionate to the kind of closeness of a system. So if a system is interconnected and used a lot, there are other better solutions than using this kind of event system. This sort of event system is useful for specifically what Jason was saying, cross-scene talking or sort of larger systemic events that sort of, it's almost like shouting a bullhorn into a crowd of people. It's like, this is at a big event that could be useful to the entire project, but it's not really a good idea for interoperability because you don't want to start baking your business rules into the event system. That's just going to give you trouble later.
Right. I like to use them for, is it more cross-system communication? But one other thing that I don't think gets enough attention is also using it for just designer content implementation, allowing designers to set up things that fire off events and then have other things that listen for events for their actual content scripting and building stuff. So they can relatively easily put together more advanced content without needing code to write like a special script for this fight and a special script for this fight. If you can have a thing where it just listens for something walking in and then fires off an event and a bunch of things happen that they kind of already understand, or they're able to link up and listen for some event like the player picked up their 10th whatever thing, or they killed this many mobs, and then this event fires off and they can hook some more stuff up without needing too much code. So it's definitely kind of a balancing act of making sure that, because you can definitely end up in giant mess of all of your game is in events and editor stuff and impossible to track and follow. Or the worst one, which I've done before and I'm sure you've seen happen quite often, is where like inside your class and inside your system, there's all this eventing and things firing around and you're getting lost just in this one little system and it's not even communicating outside of there. So you gotta watch out for that.
Although, to kind of say what you were saying, I do agree. I actually do that as well. Where if I build a system and I'm trying to solve certain problems, I won't be using events myself, but I almost always include like a on player killed or a on health received event with the express expectation of what you were saying. If a designer or somebody who's not a coder wants to modify or extend the system, I've left all the hooks in place to do so. I would just, through my own design, not use those if I don't need to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. If it's in that same system, I totally agree. Let's see. So, ooh, here's an interesting one that was right below that one. There's a whole bunch of questions in here, so I'll be scrolling through there and see what other ones pop up. But this one's just somebody that got their first programming job. Any advice for someone moving from student to pro game dev?
Practice. Basically, keep
I think
doing
you're
it.
muted, Salim.
Gather as much knowledge as you can, like engage and try to experience everything you can. Don't be afraid to take on a task or ask a question. Like that's the biggest thing is ask questions.
Talk to people a lot,
Yep.
and also don't assume that everything is wrong for no reason, because all of
Also,
the things that are wrong for some reason.
also, one thing that's like super important for someone young is just because someone is senior, don't assume that they are like super good. Like you shouldn't be afraid to, if you think something looks weird or wrong, you shouldn't be afraid to ask about that thing. Obviously be professional, but don't just assume that something that seems wrong to you is right because someone who's been doing it a long time is doing it. They could very much so believe that it's right and it could still be wrong. Or they could just have bad discipline or like it just like I've seen a lot of people who just kind of take the the title of someone and just assume so much about it. Given, I mean, it's understandable why you would do that, but you shouldn't be afraid to ask, especially if you're working with reasonable people, professional people, and more than reasonable. Just ask a question if they can't explain it, or if they, get butthurt about it. Then, I don't know, figure out a different way to ask a question or something like that. But don't be afraid to ask questions.
I found a lot of the time people like when I've seen things that I thought were a problem and I asked questions about it, everybody else kind of agreed that it was a problem too. It was just that there were other bigger problems. So it's one of the things that I think is hard when you come in. Like at least it was for me. Like you go into a game company, especially if you're interested in the game at all. Like yeah, you have these things that are like super important to you that you think are like the most important things, but there's a whole bunch of other crap going on that like you don't know about that's usually a lot more important to everybody else on the team. So like I'd bring up things and like the system kind of sucks. Like yeah, but we don't have the time to work on that because we've got to do these other three things and we got these other fires. Like and every time we touch that thing, something terrible goes wrong. Like you'll find out a lot of that is the case too. So.
Yeah.
Just
But
talk
sometimes
to
there's
people.
just like sometimes there's just like base process stuff or something like that where like no one has ever just asked the question why. People are just so used to something being a way and it could very easily be changed, but you're still steeped in this process. And then someone new comes in, it just takes someone's like from the outside of the box, just like, well, why is this way? Or like, hey, shouldn't this be this way? And then everyone else like, oh man, you know what? Never thought about it like that. So, let's look into that type of stuff. So yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. You're a fresh new person. You got a different perspective potentially. So yeah, just speak
Just
up.
don't tell everybody they're wrong while you're asking them.
Yes, don't.
Yeah, that's a very careful skill.
Do it in a respectful, professional manner. Yes.
Remember that every dumb thing in that game was made by somebody who's either there or was there. They may still be there, and they may be the person that you're talking to.
There are definitely some people who will get offended even from the most innocent question.
I would say definitely like put in a lot of effort when you're first starting out. Like you want to really work your ass off and try to shine. Like try to do more than I mean, this is a personal advice only. Like some people will disagree, but say try to do more than everybody else if you can. Try to kind of outshine and outshow everybody else. but don't do a bad job of things. Like don't try to do more stuff and do it terribly. Like make sure that you're doing a really good job of when it's to do more. Like do the best job you can on the stuff, especially your first time in there. Like it's your chance to really make like a big impression, right? Like kind of meet people and show people like how much you can do. And when opportunities pop up, if you think you can handle them, just jump on them. You know, something pops up that's available and nobody's gonna do it, and it seems like something you can do that is positive, then consider jumping on it at least.
Yeah.
So my kind of detailed answer to this is a bit Machiavellian, but it's kind of like the way I approach whenever, because one of the things I do a lot with contracting is I join teams a lot. So I've gone through the like new kid at school concept on a regular basis, and I've gotten a few tips and tricks that work really well when you're trying to figure out the team dynamics and ingratiate yourself. So one of the first things, like I said, is there tends to be people who are passionate about what they're doing and people who are not. They're just sort of day laboring, doing whatever it is. And it's not that they don't care. They could just be on a project they don't care about. And so one of the first things I like to do is basically say, hey, I'm just trying to get a handle on how things work here. Like, what are you working on? I just love to know what it is that you do. And then just the first trick is just watch what they talk about and watch what they focus on, because they'll start talking about the stuff they're passionate about and they'll gloss over stuff they're not interested in. And that's a quick way to kind of hint at what Jason was saying. You can tell if they wrote this or if they care about it based on if they're excited about what they're talking about, or if they're saying, oh, we just do this thing, but there's this other system that's like I was working on, or blah, blah, blah. So that's step one. Find out what they're doing and what they're working on. And if you ask the right questions, you can find out what they care about. And from there, this comes down to asking why, which is like 100% great advice. Ask why people do things, because not only will it help people reason about it, but it's great for you, because if the person is able to say, well, we did that because X, Y, and Z, that tells you a lot of information. That tells you that person has been here a while, they understand the system, and it means that they're able to explain their decision making. And so they're not doing things by rote. So they're a valuable person to learn from because they're engaged in the process of trying to understand things. Some people will say, because that's how it's done, or that's the way it was done before me. And that's someone who's not going to be critically analyzing the system. As far as they're concerned, they're just plugging in stuff and it doesn't work, or it works whatever way it does. So they don't care that much. Again, it mightn't be because they're bad. It might just be because they don't care about what crappy sub-project they were put on. But it tells you when the advice you're going to get from that person will be valuable on that topic. So it's very exploratory when you're trying to figure out what people are working on and what they like. And it often means that sometimes you'll find somebody who looks like they're just sort of clocking in. They don't care. But when you talk to them, they'll bring up something else and their eyes will light up and they're really excited about this other topic that's not related to what you're working on, but you can tell they enjoy that stuff. So maybe you can learn about that from them and oftentimes talk to them about a side project. So this is kind of a long-winded explanation, but I talked to one guy who was working on some boring data entry stuff, but he really loved kind of data ingestion stuff. He had built like his own pipelines for things. It was nothing to do with what he was doing. But once I started that topic with him, we ended up having great conversations about some system design stuff that had nothing to do with that, because I figured out that's what he likes to do in his free time. So finding that out is a great way to find more ways to learn. And so being curious is such a big, powerful thing you can do early on. Like, just ask yourself naively, like, oh, can I see what you're working on? Or how does this work? Gives you a great insight to how the system works, what your place in it is, and where you can find ways to change things. And that's like the number one thing. If you just go to every new opportunity with that open-minded, like exploratory vibe, you'll learn a lot of kind of incidental information that'll stack up and like give you benefit far later that you wouldn't have realized. Some of the most interesting jobs I've gotten have come from bits of information that are unrelated in a different field I learned from somebody at the right time, right? So it's just about being curious, effectively.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree with everything there. Like, I mean, to be honest, like a lot of the best learning I did was just from asking people who were better at the job than me while I was at work. Like a lot came from like asking guys like Steve questions. You know, like, hey Steve Clover, who's awesome at that kind of stuff. Yeah, just go around and ask people questions and learn all kinds of cool stuff. So.
But it is that thing, though, to be really careful. You do, again, not only do you not want to tell people they're doing it wrong, especially when, let's be honest, while it may be true they're doing it kind of wrong because they're not thinking about it, there's also a good chance that they've been doing this for 5 years and they know more than you do about that particular system. So it's usually best not to assume they're wrong, but to ask them why. Because if you ask them why, they have a chance to plead their case. And a perfectly valid response, which you'll hear a lot, is we just haven't had time for that, or we were in a hurry and that was badly written. We acknowledge that and we're moving on. And that's one of those scenarios where you'll very quickly learn that the person you're talking to may not be doing best practices. Doesn't mean they don't know best practices. They just might have been in a situation that they couldn't follow them at that time. So it's being very judicious with your questions and ensuring that you're never trying to assign blame or say this is crap and I would do it better. It's more about saying, how can I help the code base get better? And if they can see you're approaching it with good intentions and not like blaming them for the state of where it is now, then you'll get along great, because they'll want you to fix it. They just won't have the time to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So I was going through trying to get some of the newer questions to pop up here, but for some reason they are not showing in my pop-up. There was one just on programming though. I'll pop this one up real quick and then see if I can figure out how to get the newer ones to show up. Something happened and it just like stopped showing. I don't know, some weird with Restream. But it said that they started programming 4 months ago and they can read code fine, which I assume means they can read simple code files relatively fine. In 4 months, it's right where it'd be. But writing hasn't really kicked in. They know the syntax, but it doesn't really click in their head. And I think they're just kind of looking for advice or ideas on how to get better at the actual writing part. And the advice I always give is the same, which is to just do it, right? Like actually start writing some code. Find some very, very simple problems, very simple games that you can build where you can think through the whole game and explain it in 10 seconds and just try building it. And then when you get stuck, search for answers for things until you can figure it out and just slowly try to figure it out. Don't try to find a full solution, but try to find the answers to each one of the steps of the pieces of the problem. Like logically break apart your game into the 3 or 4 little things that you need to do that should be the maximum at the beginning, and handle that. Ideally it's like one thing, like you're hitting a button and something else is happening.
Yeah, one of the best ways to learn is to find a problem and fix it. Like that'll
Without
teach you a whole bunch.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just because you can read a book doesn't mean that you can write a poem or you can write a novel, right? So don't judge yourself too harshly if you can read but can't write, because they're not the same skills. Like it's one thing to comprehend something, it's another thing to design something. And so the unfortunate truth is, just like Jason was saying, the only real way to do it is to just do it, right? It's how do you get better at writing? You write a lot of stuff. It's just you have to get used to solving those kinds of problems, and that's what it is. A lot of programming is solving problems. So if you're trying to get better at it, you just need to find simple problems. There's a lot of websites and things you can search for that'll give you programming problems, and or take courses, follow Udemy or whatever else you want, and just slowly go through it and just sort of see how other people solve problems. So the unfortunate truth is it's just a time investment. You just have to get better at doing it to the point where it becomes second nature.
That's pretty much the only thing you can do is practice. So here, let me I can't get the chat to sync up, but I can pop up the questions a different way. There was one.
Is chat frozen?
Yeah, it's just not, for some reason, like the chat desynced from YouTube, so it doesn't show up. Like it's fine in YouTube, but it doesn't show up in the Restream UI, so I can't just hit the button and pop it up. So I guess there was a question about getting a tools development job. They wanted to know about like applying for a tools dev job, but the position requires console/game experience, and they're an enterprise developer. And I thought it was kind of interesting because my guess is that they probably don't really care that you have too much. I mean, depending on the tools position, they may not care at all about your actual console development experience. They might care a lot about it. It might be, depending on the tools job, if it's an art side tools job, they're going to care a lot about that stuff. And you're probably going to need to understand and know it. If it's more on the data side and the build and the process side, then they're probably not actually going to care at all. And either way, I would just apply for the thing. There's no reason not to really. Like if you're interested in it, I'd say apply, because I know this is true for me, and I'm sure for you guys, but every single job I've ever had a bunch of nonsense on the job requirements, a bunch of stuff that I never did and I was never going to do. was listed on the job requirements.
My first big job was me applying for a .NET C# developer job, and I spent the next 2.5 years writing JavaScript. so that happens. That happens to you.
It's usually not quite that extreme, but like in my experience, at least a third of the stuff on the resume or on the job descriptions is just stuff that people put in as like random wish list stuff because they thought they needed to fill in more crap. Right? Like they got a lot of the time what happens is somebody will go, hey, what are the requirements? Everybody will email in a list of stuff, and then somebody who doesn't really know what it is will put it all together and then post up the job. So I would apply.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I sometimes that list of skills is just like what would be nice, but they put it in as requirements. But in the end, if you have applicable skills for the position, apply, get your foot in the door, and then just show them why they should pick you.
Yeah. So I've said this before about resumes, but there's a lot of blown out advice that kind of gets really convoluted. At the end of the day, if you just reverse the roles, put yourself in the role of someone doing hiring, it's actually a lot simpler if you kind of see what your own objectives are. And usually it's straightforward as I have a specific task in mind that I can't do or don't have time to do. I'm trying to hire someone to do that job. But if they could also do these other jobs, that would be nice. And then that's what they structure the resume around. They're like, I want these jobs. I want these skills. It'd be nice if they had these skills. And then that's a litmus test for whether you should even be interviewed. And if it looks like what's written on your resume tells me that you're either going to be able to do the job or be able to learn how to do the job, you're there for a resume or at least a callback. And then once you get to that stage, it's purely about, do they look like they're not bullshitting? Do they seem like they're a nice person or that they're good to work with? And are they going to be self-motivated enough that I don't have to basically babysit them with constant commands? That's it. That's the entire depth of it. And it basically boils down to a lot of people are like, I'm a graduate. How do I make a good resume? Well, you can't. You just don't have the experience to do it. There's nothing you can write on your resume about how motivated you are or how enthusiastic. It's just no one cares. Like the truth is, it's going to be, you either have to get a graduate program by just being good enough to get in, and then once you've got some experience, that's usually enough to get you in the door to more places. And then once you get in the door, it's about being affable and friendly and, more importantly than anything else, enthusiastic that you can do it and that you can do it well and that you want to do well. And that's it. It's just that cycle. It's only that the more you do things, the bigger the CV gets, the more you can get in the door on, the more you can prove that you can do it and keep that cycle going. It's not as complicated as people think. You don't have to have dramatic resumes. You don't have to have big complicated things. Just prove you can do the job and be friendly in interviews. Basically all it really takes.
Yeah, and prepare for your interviews. Like, you should know who you're interviewing with, who those people are, what they like to do on the weekends and their spare time. I mean, yeah, not to some extent, but at least like what games they've worked on, well, what types of things they post online. If they've made some other game that you really loved and played in the past, like that is something that you can be ready to talk about in the interview too and stuff. I would just say get a good idea of who you're talking to before you go in there.
And this comes back to the fact that, like, if you've been doing this long enough, the skills they've asked for tells you what they're missing. So oftentimes you can read we could do with an X and a Y, and if they've done this, it's like, oh, they're building a RESTful API. They're doing a backend structure for this, that, or the other. And once you know that, you kind of can guess what they're trying to do or what technologies they're working for. And again, look at the job posting, try to read the description, look at what the company does, and you can usually get pretty close. You can say they're a company that does X, their post is looking for Y, they probably want me to do this on this project. And that'll give you a greater ability to have a good conversation about whether you can do it, lets you know what other technologies they might be using. It's just, that's just about being prepared in general, yeah.
Just don't stalk them.
Definitely
walk in the interview knowing their kids' names.
Hey, yeah, your kid did great in soccer last weekend.
Last night when you put your son to bed at 8 o'clock, you
start bringing them in all their favorite chocolates.
This is the place where you propose to your wife, and I noticed that.
I know these are your favorite. Got your wife's favorite too. So yeah, what's your channel link, Salim? That was the next question.
I don't. What is that?
I'm gonna pop that one up once a week at least. Hopefully people just keep asking it.
Oh, my YouTube channel.
Yeah, your YouTube channel.
I do not currently have one. I apologize.
So this was one I don't really have good advice for. What do you recommend for college students who want to get their heads in game dev but feel like college takes up most of their time?
Oh, so getting game dev while they're in college?
I guess they're going to college for something else where game dev is somewhat of a distraction from getting their
My advice would be do game jams. Because I'll be honest, if you're well, it's a double-edged sword. Most people will tell you when you're younger, you're at the best opportunity to do risky things, like try and make games because you don't have as much dependence or risk. But at the same time, you want to set yourself up well for the future. And so I always lean on the safety net solution of get your degree, get your ability to have a job for life, and then move on from there. And so I would say don't make college the priority until it's done, then you can do other things. But if you still want to keep games on the radar, that's what game jams are for. They're literally a day or two, or maybe 4 days. Mm-hmm. And these are things you can schedule around that keep you engaged in the concept of making games and building up a portfolio while still doing the important thing of getting the college thing out of the way. So I would say even if it games your ultimate goal, you're still better off doing the college thing, working in enterprise a little bit, saving up some money, doing game jams, meeting people, building a community, suddenly finding 4 people you want to work with, then maybe you can branch off and make a game studio together. But you still want to go the sensible route rather than just saying, because games is my goal, I should skip everything else and try to shortcut. That just isn't a good idea.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, if you got, doing game jams or just if you got any hobby time, you could potentially just make that your hobby and spend any time you can investing in researching, learning, all that stuff, meeting people, like Jason said. But yeah, focus on, what you're going to college for and get that knocked out. Because that's a big risk to just
maybe try to get a part-time job doing some game dev stuff or at a game studio too. Right? So that way you're still in there doing it while you're working, and then it gets rid of some of the time constraint because it's also filling in the job time, right? Like just working part-time. I mean, I know a lot of people are working through college, so if you could get a job where it's actually game dev related, it'd be great. I mean, it obviously be harder to get in as an actual game dev, but you might be able to get a
QA job.
What's that?
You could probably get like a part-time QA job if that works with your college time. Obviously, it's still college is variable in how much time it's going to take from you, during projects and stuff like that. So getting a static job.
Now, here's a question for both of you guys. So say you're in school, right? You're going to college and maybe you're like two years in and you suddenly have the opportunity to leave college and go take the job doing the game development thing as a programmer or designer or artist or whatever it is they want to do. What are your thoughts? Would you leave school and go do the job, or very dramatically based on the job, or stay in school no matter what? I'm just curious.
For me, it's very dramatically based on the job. If it's like getting a entry-level job at a large game studio where they traditionally give you like 4 years graduate training followed by a placement in some team, then you're set. That's the goal, and you're good from there on. If it's a startup that wants you to be their lead developer or something else that is really no security whatsoever, then hell no. And under no circumstances is that going to happen.
Right. Yes. I would say the same. Yeah. If it's a stable thing that's where there's room for growth and a proven track record, then I'm much more likely to jump on that. And I definitely wouldn't jump on leaving school to go do the startup with a bunch of friends who've never done anything before either, and they're all just trying. Like way too risky there.
Very, very specific thing you're saying here. Is this
no, I've heard plenty of stories from people. Man. Not so much of just dropping out of college for these things, but kicking off startups and stuff. And
that seems like an easy one though. It seems like common sense wise, you would either go to a place that's stable or stay in school.
I feel like there are some people who wouldn't they could get a great dream job offer and they still feel like they need to keep going to school. And I think that's not always necessarily sometimes you just outlearn what you're going to learn in school, and you definitely will learn faster on the job in my experience, than anywhere else, because you're just engaged and engulfed in it all day, every day, and it's mandatory that you figure it out. You have to learn it. Right? You either learn it or you're fired.
Well, that's assuming that they were going to school for game dev, and this isn't I was in college for 2 years to become a chemist, and I decide I get a job at a stable place to become a game dev. I'm now basically starting at zero versus I get a job to be a chemist dev. After 2 years of chemistry, I've got 2 years plus. Now I get to continue to build my resume in the same field. So if I'm going to college for one thing,
I also just I got a degree in something I never ever used. That happens a lot of people I know. So
well, same. Well, I can honestly, like, one of the questions that came up is like someone asked, "How did my game development degree help me?" And the answer, it didn't. Like nothing on that course. That course taught me Java, and that's the only thing valuable. Everything past that point, no value to me whatsoever. No offense to all of my lectures, but it just didn't. It didn't go anywhere. Like the point was that it was a token kind of, oh, it's game dev for the sake of game dev, but it's not really. It was basically just a programming course with a couple of elective silly bits that referenced games. The truth be told, I learned more with a bit of time on Google than I did with that stuff. So I would say, but the question is, was it valuable? And that's a different conversation. Was it valuable to get into games? No. But I would say I would never have taken the route that I did in life if I'd gone in through games directly. Now, who knows, that may have been more beneficial. But the truth is, because of the route I did go, I ended up learning Java and JavaScript and working in banks and working in supermarkets and working in, all sorts of crazy jobs, working in back end and front end and all this stuff that later on, when I was at a point in my life where I could start meeting people who were into game dev the way I was in communities and whatever, I have all of that background. I have the job security for life, and I have a lot of experience that is tangential that other people don't have. So it wouldn't have been the path I would have chosen. But I don't regret the course and stuff that I did. I just had to be honest that taking a course in game dev didn't really do anything for me. It just taught me programming and set me down the path of a stable programming career, which then gave me the financial security to then explore my actual hobbies and interests. And now I'm self-employed, work for myself, wake up whenever I want, and choose which jobs I want to take. So that's how that happens,
Oh yeah, no, I love having just exposure and experience in both enterprise and game dev stuff. I think it's super valuable, and I kind of somewhat stumbled in the same way. It's kind of interesting. On the enterprise topic, though, there was this question that popped up now that chat was working about learning .NET and C# and Unity version of C#, kind of, and they're wondering if it will help them code better and get a job as a programmer better. And I just wanted to clarify a couple things on it. First is just that the .NET is really just the framework, right? It's a set of libraries that allow you to do all of the things. It's all of the classes and code that you're calling into when you write your C# stuff. And the version of C#, Unity and all of your other .NET applications like web applications, Windows applications, WPF stuff, Xamarin stuff, all that is all in it's all in C# and it's all the same language. You're just using slightly different versions of that .NET library where you have access to different things. There's some obviously they've upgraded and they add new features and stuff, but there's not really a big difference between the two. So if you're asking if it will help you code better, I would say not necessarily, but looking at some enterprise code and some enterprise videos and topics will definitely help you code better. But it won't always directly apply. In fact, a lot of the time, the stuff that you'll see outside of game development in C# doesn't apply at all, or is this kind of counter to how you would want to do it in a game development environment. All right, so Salim will be right back, and I believe Jason is maybe back now.
I'm back.
For some reason, you're not moving in here. I see you on one stream, but not the other. Let's see if it's actually updating.
Okay, it seems like it's updating now.
Okay. Just on my side, it's a little messed up. All right, cool. Yeah, so I assume I don't know. Would you recommend people go do any non-Unity C# stuff, assuming that they just want to work on game development and they just want to work in Unity right now? Do you think there's much value in them going out and learning some other C# stuff like web stuff or Windows stuff? Or
so this is an interesting one. So I think the tools are so democratized these days. You could learn, and I guess it's been quite proven, quite successful. You can be a game dev exclusively, never have any conceptual grounding in C# or .NET, and just make games and be successful. But that is kind of like rolling one die and hoping to get a good number out of it. If you go and learn how to code and just generally .NET and how to do it correctly, it's like adding extra die in your hand for when you're rolling to get that success, right? So I would say I know people who don't code who have made games that are on Steam and have made a living off of those games. But I know a few of them, and I know a lot more people who didn't. And you can hope to be that person, or you can give yourself the stable job of being a .NET developer, which teaches you not only how to build games, but how to build software under any circumstance, really. Once you learn the fundamentals of inheritance and polymorphism and all the object-oriented stuff, and you learn it to a good degree, you can work on pretty much anything, from mobile apps and games all the way up to desktop apps and back-end services and whatever. And that gives you job security and freedom, but it also makes you just better at understanding system design, and you'll get better at doing everything else as a result. Like, once you've got more knowledge, you'll be better at anything you do. So I always recommend it. I think there's a lack of kind of background knowledge in .NET across the board when it comes to game development. But I have to also be honest and admit that it's not necessary. I just think it's a good life advice, and I think it's good for the industry as a whole. I just don't think you don't have to, but I would honestly recommend people do. And it really comes down to, like, if you hate doing it and you just want to make games, I can't begrudge you for not wanting to go and spend all the years of time it's going to take to get good at programming. But if you like programming even a little bit, you will definitely enjoy learning that stuff more, and it'll only make you better and give yourself less headaches as you start to build larger systems. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend it, unless you hate it, in which case, then don't. That's basically it.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend people do too much of it, just because if they're never going to use it, it will end up just a lot of the things that they'll learn. If they're never going to get a job doing it and they just go straight into game development, then it's going to be somewhat wasted. But there's definitely some value there in learning it. And I think that without a doubt, they should spend some time, like I said, maybe not years, but at least some time going through the process of building web apps and building some Windows apps and a couple other things. I think there's definitely value in understanding all the low level stuff and just getting a much deeper understanding of C#. But at the starting out point, which I think was like, I'm trying to focus more on, like, if they're just starting out learning Unity and C#, I wouldn't spend too much time going into something else right away. But I would definitely spend some time understanding it, though, and being able to speak about it. And if you're in an interview and you can say, yes, I can make a web page in .NET, the latest version of .NET. I can make a little Windows tool that does some things in .NET too, and I understand databases and all the other kind of core stuff, how to make an API call and how to set up a web API. I think that alone will give you a lot of value. I think the stuff Jason's got also, like, there's plenty of opportunity there and a ton of value, like understanding the deeper side of it, but also just getting a base level, I think, has a good amount of value. Spending a week in each, understanding how to do them each is still a lot more valuable than none at all.
I do agree that if you're just going into full game all the time, then you don't need it. But again, this purely comes from a safety net mentality, is if you go into full-time making games and you decide at some point you want to pivot, either to earn more money or to have a more stable job and do standard web development, you can't easily just translate yourself right into working in enterprise software. There's a lot of stuff there that's different, like very different in terms of how systems are used, what tools are used, etc. But I would say if you've done enterprise and you move over to games, that's doable. Now, there's obviously still differences, and you still have to learn much more about performance and the value of update loops separately from event systems. But the point is, I think it's a fairly doable transition to be enterprise and move to games. And if you actually ask a lot of people have done enterprise into games. But I don't know anybody who works games all the time, taught themselves through games, spent 5 or 6 years being a game dev, and then migrated back out into enterprise stuff.
I actually know a couple.
Okay, well, I
they've done really well for it too. So yeah, I know I can think of 2 guys offhand right away who've done really well with that.
Well, I imagine it's harder, at least. I'll put it that way. I would say it's a much harder experience to try to migrate.
It might be. I don't know. In my experience, enterprise software tends to be so much easier than game code. Like just the dependencies and requirements on the stuff tend to be, now not always, obviously. You get to some level like it get crazy and hard, but most of the time, most enterprise stuff is internal applications and stuff, and they're relatively easy to do a lot on with very little work, compared to games where you're going out to a lot of people. It just depends on the type of enterprise.
That's a good point. So I want to make clear, when I say enterprise is different, and I think it's harder, but for different reasons, it's actually not about the code. I think you're right. The problems you're solving in games tend to require a lot more interesting interplay with, like, the whole singleton problem, for example. It's not really much of an issue with enterprise. But my point is, in game development, you're learning algorithms and solving problems with algorithms. In enterprise, you're learning frameworks and interplay of frameworks and how to deal with web stuff. And so I would say that on a literal code problem-solving basis, it's probably harder in games. But I would say, like, the point is, if you've learned all of the tools and enterprise stuff and source control and REST API calls and whatever, there are times you will need to make API calls in a game. But if you're doing game code and you've learned how to make a pooling system, you're probably not using that over an enterprise unless you're like doing caching. And even then it's not really pooling and it's using a different library. And you would have probably learned that through a framework separately anyway. So my point is, it's not that enterprise code is harder. It's that it's a different set of tools and mindset. And some of that transfers to game stuff, but I don't think much game stuff transfers over to enterprise.
Right. Yeah. It's just the code. There's definitely, like learning Unity plus 10 other tools when you get to jump, especially with web development. At least last time I was really heavy into it. There's just a lot in the tool chain. So yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's just
because I think like a very small microcosm of this, because I love this question. It's actually really interesting. Is one of the most common questions I see written about Unity, just a general game dev question, is how do I save my data? And oftentimes it's how do I save my data, in JSON? Because that's considered that's how you save games, in JSON. But if you've done enterprise work and you've written APIs and you've written all this other stuff, you're used to data not really meaning anything. Data is just a transfer protocol. You send it as XML, you send it as JSON, you send serialized data, data is just data, and you import it in, you'd write importers, you'd write your own deserializers. It just becomes a thing that has no... It's not precious or interesting. It's just an application layer that it's persistence as a layer. And if you can think as persistence as a layer when you're making game stuff, you don't ask those kinds of questions, because you instead draw a line and say stuff goes out to the magic save persistence layer, stuff comes back in, and if I need to swap out between databases or JSON or Oracle or SQLite, I can do that, because that's my understanding of what JSON data and saving means is very different. But if you start with games, you often come from the mindset of, I have game data, I need to save game data. What do I do that? I hear JSON's good. And I just think you'll architecturally think about it in a different way. So that's the kind of stuff that I think comes from experience that you won't get if you start the game route,
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I think it's all good. It seems like there's a lot of interest in chat too. People disagree with me. They're probably right. Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting topic. It really is.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I've done a lot of just bouncing back and forth. I've just personally always found it so much easier on the enterprise projects. The problems just tended to be less complicated, and I guess it's largely just because it was always such a controlled environment. Which makes
I would admit
I think that there are definitely enterprises projects that would be nuts and 1,000 times more complicated.
I will say that most of the time in enterprise, problems have a pseudo-known solution. Oftentimes there is an architecture that you use. In this kind of project, you use MVVM. In this kind of scenario, you would use a mediator or whatever. And so it tends to be easier insofar as once you know the right answers, they're easier to apply. But in games, it's very much like there isn't a way to do an inventory system in games.
Right, there isn't just an inventory framework that works across all games. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, and I mean, the other thing, like in my experience, like I've seen a lot of really big, complex game code projects where they're like, many millions of lines, and then a lot of relatively simple enterprise projects where like the entire project might fit into a class in one of these big MMOs that was, like a lot harder. So it's just like I look at the relative difficulty for me. I'm like, oh, that looks approachable. So,
But my argument is oftentimes when you see that humongous file, the reason it's humongous is inline is contacting the file system and it's doing loops and activating animators. And it's like, if this was an enterprise version, there would be, again, persistence thing you call, and half of that code wouldn't live there. And so it's one of those architecturally different kind of things.
Just the fact that so much gets hidden away in the frameworks to abstract it away, which is good. But yeah. Okay. I don't know. I don't know what to jump onto next. Is there anything that looked interesting there, Salim, you wanted to talk about? We muted again?
Yep. Sorry.
All good.
I can't scroll. Why can't I scroll the chat? What is this?
I don't know. It's scrolling for me. It's working, and I'm seeing new questions, I think. So.
Jason, can you scroll? I'm seeing new stuff come in, but can you?
I always open the actual YouTube video so I can see the chat on the side because I don't rely on this one.
You guys are all advanced. Let me see.
Yeah, I'm a professional restreamer.
You just throw something out because I can't. Let me go to the channel here.
Somebody was asking if there are other things like if graphic design, for example, translates into game design, or if there are other professions or I guess industries that translate well into getting a game design job or being a game designer. So like graphic design, I think translates more into the art side than necessarily game design, but I don't know, maybe. I know like writing and storytelling and stuff can definitely.
Graphic design, could be good from a standpoint of being a game designer and being focused on like UX and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, of course, if you're writing, then telling stories is kind of a key part of at least doing content for a game. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I think programming can obviously segue into game design just fine. Certainly in systems design. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think if you want to be a game designer, I think it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you have the chops for it, if you love playing games, if you love telling stories, if you love the challenge or the concept of the challenge of creating experiences for people, then I think that you can probably find something worthwhile from whatever you're doing. If you come from like a science background and then you have some basis for creating some cool game around like monsters in an ecosystem and how they work, and then throwing in other systems on top of that to make it actually a game about combat. Or you can make a novel game because you like telling stories and you have a certain visual styling. So I mean, ultimately, I think that if you really want to make games, I think anything can segue over from your skills, and you probably just inherently use that as a base to create a game anyway, because it's what you're most familiar with before you start stepping outside of your comfort zone. Once you got your chops.
I want to share a video too. There was one that I saw yesterday. I actually watched it in front of my wife, and she called me a weirdo. But it was on game design, so it popped up, and I was like, "That's weird." A video about game designers. I was like, "I'm gonna watch this." I think it was titled like 4 different types of game designers. They just posted
extra credits, yeah.
Yeah, and it was actually talking about like the different game design jobs, which I thought was interesting. They had one in there that you like kind of loosely mentioned that reminded me of it when you said the experience. They listed 4 types of game designers. There was the content designer, systems designer, there's some other kind of a designer, and then an experience designer. What's the level designer? Yeah, level designer, and then experience designer was the one that kind of caught me off guard. I mean, and you mentioned that. I thought it was an interesting video, though, just talking about the different types of design and the things that you might be interested in based on what you like. If you like numbers or writing or building out levels and stuff, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and all of those are specialties for sure, especially level design. Level design is a very particular skill set because you're trying to, you know, not only are you trying to create something that's balanced or works well with the type of game you're making, but you're also trying to tell a story. And, you know, obviously you're supporting content, you're supporting systems. Level designer is kind of a unique design brain. Like I don't have a particularly strong level design skill. I mean, I can design a level, but I'm certainly pale in comparison to a lot of level designers that I know. And I am generally in awe at how they figure out or think about certain things, especially when you're talking about like an FPS and how you handle sight lines and stuff like that. And you throw multiplayer in there and things like that. It's just like a level that I'm just like, wow, like I'd love to sit and learn about this stuff. But obviously I don't have like a whole lot of free time to do that.
Yeah, I used to think I was good at level design.
What's that?
As I say, I used to think I was good at designing levels, and then I'd like watch somebody like Lenny or some other designer go in like, oh yeah, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like this is 1,000 times better than what like I spent 4 weeks building this little hill, and it's terrible.
It's pretty crazy.
Bad idea. Yeah. I don't even know why I built the hill. Like,
if I ever got the opportunity, I would love to, you know, invest like a year or so in to just like doing some level design work officially, because I think I get a lot out of it. But yeah,
I think it's my favorite right now. Of all of the things I'm learning and reading up on, level design is my favorite topic at the moment. It's so multifaceted and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations, either of you, on stuff to look at, or for people, or for me to look at and watch in front of my wife next time? How to be a better level designer? I'll make her into a level designer.
I assume Jason has some references. I'm curious.
He does appear to be typing, so
yeah, he's looking.
It's usually a flurry of links coming.
I figure he would pull a book off of his shelf.
No, that's funny. I don't currently have any books on the topic at the moment, but I will be getting some. That's definitely on the list. So that's a good starting point. Followed by where's the other ones?
Okay, can you put that into the chat too? Or
I don't think I can. I think only you can because it's your.
Okay, can I? If it'll let me paste it in there. All right, let's drop this in chat for everybody. Hopefully it works.
Oh yeah.
And there's also this one here, which is great.
All right, let's go through the next one. Oh, what is this? All right, I'm going to share another one. Popping it in the chat. All right.
Oh, wow. This is cool.
Yeah, it looks like it's a giant resource full of cool game design stuff.
Wow.
I got some reading ahead of me.
And then as a kind of a smaller introductory one, here's a little bit of a lighter read to the other ones. But there you go. That should be about a year's worth of reading for you right there to start.
Now I just got to find the video versions. I'll post this last one up here. Find the video versions of all those. I am the slowest reader in the world. That's why I love audiobooks and videos. It's like I can listen to a video on like 2x, no problem, but I can't read at like even half x. Like super slow. All right, so there was a super chat that came in, and I thought this was a good one for Jason because it's about assembly definitions, and I know you have some strong thoughts on it. And it said a group of scripts reference each other. Should they be put into their own assembly? And I would, in general, say yes. Personally, I'm curious though. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that's a vague term. Reference each other. That's a bit nebulous. That's like interact with each other. Everything interacts with each other in a system in general. That's usually how it works. The rules should be more.
They don't interact with anything but these other scripts in this. So it's a group of them that only are interacting.
So the way I approach that problem is I group things that are likely to change and change for the same reason. So for example, I might group all of my UI stuff under a UI DLL. But the thing is, if I look at that and I go, hang on a second, we're currently using DoTween or we're using TextMesh Pro, but we mightn't want to use DoTween. Now, again, it's different if you're doing contract work or you're delivering stuff that's integration code versus you're writing your own. But if there's a thing that might change, say, probably the easiest one is if you're sending emails. I've seen this done a lot where you're sending emails to your players to say you've subscribed or you've gotten some rewards or whatever. I would put not just the email code together in a DLL. I would have the email code in a DLL, but then I would have email dot this implementation. So email dot pigeon or whatever is like a separate DLL. The reason why is that one references the group email DLL, but it's also keeping all of the specific vendor code in one place. So if I need to hot swap it out for a different implementation, I can. So it's not about what interacts with each other. It's about what interacts with each other and is likely to change together. So I usually have something that is like, this is the system, and then these are the implementations of the system that can be swapped out, but this contract remains the same. So yeah, it's not just arbitrarily everything that's interacting, it's everything that's interacting, but it's going to consistently stay together. If the contract changes, then you'd have to change that in the base system, and then the other stuff will change as a result. So try to look at it as a DLL is like it's like putting something in a box, right? If you've got a shelf and you're putting all of your stuff in boxes, if you put it in a DLL, you're saying, I want to put everything, if I ever have to open that box, it's for the same reason, right? I don't want to have to open that box and this box and this box all to do one task. So if you've got one box to do with a particular hobby or interest, put all of that hobby stuff in there, and then maybe split it up into sub boxes based on like, this is my music, all my music related interests, and then in here is my headphone related stuff, and here's my audio interface related stuff or whatever. Like it's all about splitting it up down this sort of hierarchy. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is, well, you just heard the long answer. So
yeah. Well, I mean, the short, I guess it's yes, but not necessarily. Like it just because they only reference each other isn't enough to justify them going into their own assembly, right?
Yeah.
As I think I kind of misread that too, and I wanted to clarify that. Like, just because they're a group of scripts that only reference each other, like, doesn't necessarily mean that they should be in an assembly, but it leans that way, I guess.
Like in a Unity example, the best way to describe it is right now in Unity, if you've got 1,000 scripts in your project and you open the health system and you decide to like change the name of a variable, your entire application rebuilds all of the code and all of the DLLs. If you had a single DLL for the health system and you change that one name or variable in the health system, it would rebuild the health system and nothing else because the other code hasn't changed. So literally that build bar that happens whenever Unity exits after you've changed code is building the application again. And so if there's an area of the application you're working on, you can put an assembly definition or a DLL or whichever version of that you want, and it will say this only recompiles this stuff because it's related to itself. So that's a very practical example of, like, there's no correct answer about which lines to draw, but it's your own project, so I'll either be working on this system, maybe the level editor, or I'll be working on this system, the actual gameplay loop or whatever. And if you don't want one to affect the other in terms of build times or reference dependencies or something, that's a good line to draw. So it's up to you, but it's being practical about what you want to affect the other thing.
Makes sense. I have a question though. Have you ever really run into a case where your builds were slow because of the code? And it wasn't just because people had shoved a ton of crap into the project and bloated it up with assets that you didn't need? Like,
yeah, normally the main reason a project's slow is because people import a Unity package, including all of its examples and whatever else. So yeah. I have a habit which annoys a lot of other people, but I use it in my own projects. I will, whenever I import a new asset, I will click the all view, select all the assets, and I will use the tag system to tag every asset with the name of the asset vendor. And then I'll go into their samples folder and I will tag each of them with the word example. And so that way I can do a search with the tags and find all example code or all per asset code and just like mass delete stuff once we know we're not using it. Because I like to separate out the code. I don't really care about the folder structure. I've had this conversation before. I don't really care where things are in a folder because the project view isn't a folder hierarchy. It's not, as much as people think it is, it's not actually a folder structure. It's a file system. And so if you tag all of the data, you can search it and filter whichever way you like. So I make a point of whenever I put in new assets, I will tag all the documentation as documentation. I will tag all of the assets as whatever. And that way, if I ever need to do a what's bloating my project, I can bulk delete or edit those things.
Yeah, it makes sense. I was just curious because like I've never really run into the case where like assembly definitions or splitting up the assemblies was going to make a noticeable difference. Like I mean, I may have been able to shave a second or two off of a build, but it's like at the extreme.
Well, for me, the main case isn't that. Like, I'll admit that it's not really been an issue at just code in Unity perspective. But if you are designing a system, like a weapon reloading system or a health system or whatever, and you're doing it with a kind of test-driven approach, you're going to want to run test on a regular cycle. And Unity's just little blip of stopping and rebuilding every time is enough to drive you insane. So that's the cases where I would take that out and I make my own DLL because I can just keep rapidly iterating with no building at all. And then when I'm done, dump the DLL into Unity. So it's only for a system that I'm literally designing in this cyclical way where the whole, like, a great example is VR. If I'm working on a VR project, I won't work in Unity, not because I can't, but because whenever you're working on a VR project, you have to press play, wait for the VR service to start up, have the scene, move the camera and place it in place, grab the headset and kind of angle yourself to try something out. Or if I'm just testing a gun shooting mechanic, I can test that mechanically as code, check fire rates and pass stuff in and write all the code I need for like the reload checks. And if you don't have any ammo, you can't shoot, all this kind of code. I can check that logic without having to like strap into the bloody headset and the whole lot every time. So I would build those things much faster in like a little loop. And then I will drop the finished DLL into Unity, hook it up and then do some integration tests manually and just see it works. And then it'd be done. So if it's something where Unity's like build time is actually going to slow me down, not the project, but like my workflow, then I won't do it in Unity.
Makes sense. So you mentioned folder structure, and this popped up on a game design question. So I thought I wanted to hit it, which is how. So when you're working as a game designer, how important is it to have an organized file/folder structure? And I don't know that you really like this. It's not really like an applicable question to a lot of projects, right? Because you're not really building things as a designer using files and folder structures unless you're doing it some of the things in Unity, right? So I guess like say we're in a Unity specific context and you're building things like prefabs and other content in Unity itself or in whatever engine. Do you use a lot of folder structures? Is there any? Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Salim? Is there? Do you use a lot of this structuring and stuff? I mean, you probably do in docs and stuff, but
I would say generally file structure and naming of files and logical naming of files. If you're not using a database structure that has like a key ID or something like that, it is hugely important. Just from a personal standpoint, if you have if a designer needs to interact with a tool and there's a drop down, and that drop down doesn't like take wildcards or something like that, and there's a consistent structure on how things are named, and they need to search for something, then they know to search for big, smaller for their thing. If things are named all goofy, then they now have to go and search somewhere else. File structures help with that, especially if you have to dig into data. Which in my career, a lot of flat file systems, I've had to just go directly to the directories and look for stuff and then just open up the file in an editor, put Notepad++ or something, and then manipulate the data there. So I would, for me personally, I am a crazy man about folder structure and naming of files. because it can just be really, really frustrating, and just eat up some time, albeit minuscule, I guess, if you know where to look for stuff or know how to search for things. But it can just be a huge pain in the ass to find stuff. And obviously naming of a file is important simply because it can convey what this thing is. If you're silly about the naming, many years down the road, when someone needs to look at something, they should be able to look at it and go, okay, well, this is exactly what this thing is, or generally this is probably what this is. I should look for it. So yeah, for me, from my point of view and stuff that I've interacted with, I think it's pretty important. Just from a user standpoint. I mean, ultimately it is, even though I'm not the game player, I am the tool user. From a user standpoint, it's important. But I'm just talking about naming as far as a designer, other designers creating data.
It can be a nightmare when stuff's not organized or
oh man,
hard to find. What about for like versioning and stuff? Because I mean, obviously, like the terrible version is like you got number 2 and number 3 and number 4 of a document.
Underscore latest. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Underscore copy 7. Use this. Like, what do you generally recommend for that? Like, are you now like Google Docs style stuff and just doing updates in there? Do you go for like source control and Perforce type thing, or some built-in system? Like, do you have a preference on how you do docs now?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, for docs, I mean, right now I use a lot of Confluence, work-wise, but personally, like I'll just, sometimes if I'm pretty diligent about a document, I will just have a revision number in the document and just manually update that and just have a section for revisions and say what each revision was. Give a quick summary on, revision 1.2, added this section, added this, whatever. I mean, that's how I have been before. But of course, if you're using something like Confluence or whatever, you can look at the previous things. You can see what was changed and all stuff. General source control behavior. So yeah, I mean, nowadays I think it's generally pretty simple to keep track of different revisions. And go back.
You can even just keep stuff on Google Docs or in your Drive. But personally, I just use lots of local Git repos. So like people look at Git repos and they think that you need to go to GitHub and do a whole big thing and publish it. Git's just, it is, funny enough, you said it earlier, Git is actually a file system. That's what it is. It's like a miniature file system that uses GUIDs and then splits based on the shown paths. But like how it works is it's literally just a structure. It's a file structure. So if you have even just documents, like it doesn't have to be code or a big project. If it's just you're writing notes, you can just in that directory, Git init, make a load of, saves whenever you need to. And you don't ever have to publish it somewhere. It can just be in this folder. You now have a nice repo of all of your stuff. As for version numbers, I would use semantic versioning. I'm a big fan of the good old-fashioned 1.0.0. Each one has a semantic meaning. It's very clear, and it's standardized.
I've used Git before, but it's hard for me to share with people who don't know how to use it.
Well, that's the thing too, right? Is you can use Git internally to like manage your own versioning, and then just give them the output file. They don't have to have the Git repo, so you can just use that in a directory by yourself, and it's just a good way for you to keep track of your own stuff. It's actually really cool. There's a great Pluralsight course called How Git Works, where they literally show you step by step what, like opening the files and reading them and watching the directory change, and fundamentally how Git actually works. And it makes it really, once you've demystified that process for yourself, it's like, oh, I can just use this anytime I need to version something. That's what it is. So it makes it a lot more open-minded as a tool, right?
I want to check that out.
Pretty powerful. Somebody Nicholas was reading the How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think we kind of recommended last week. Wanted to know if we had any other book recommendations. I was curious what you guys had.
Oh god, yeah. How many do you want?
Go with the one.
Are we talking programming? Are we talking just general book recommendations? Design recommendation books?
This one was not programming, so I'm guessing let's go for another non-programming one.
Okay, so the one I always go to, I always will bring that up as my first because I think it's really just valuable. It's just Getting Things Done. David Allen, can't go wrong. That book, that book sort of systemizes problem solving. It makes you realize how much stuff. The metaphor of it is that I love is that he talks about how you've got mental RAM. The amount of stuff you keep in your head and don't realize it. Like, oh, I'll get round to getting milk, or oh, I'll pick that stuff up off the floor later. And you don't realize it, but you're like occupying brain space. And once you start realizing that these are tasks, you think you're not doing them, so you're saving yourself some work, but the work is your brain constantly keeping track of that stuff. And once you realize just getting that stuff out of your brain is actually easier than just doing the damn thing, then you think it's, this is very, very valuable. Some of it's long-winded and it's not a perfect book, but if you approach what it's doing, it will make you recontextualize how you think about getting work done. So that one I think is just valuable. There we go. Lost a few of those. General design book. I think it's a bit dated now, but it's a great book in general. Don't Make Me Think, Steve Krug. And this one it's about it's kind of website design. Now, this mostly talks about some of the older websites, so back in the early days of Amazon and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit, again, maybe some of the principles don't really apply anymore. But what it does do is it makes you think about using things like the internet from the perspective of a user and not as a designer or not as a programmer. So once you start thinking about it, you'll be going, hang on a second. Why do things use that file menu? Or why is it now that every app from Discord to Slack and other ones all have this sidebar of organizations with circle icons for it? Why have we suddenly decided that's settled on? And this will make you think about those questions and what that means for how people engage with those kinds of problems. Then I just think another generally good book. Stephen King on writing. So we talked about how tangential hobbies and interests all feed into each other. And so I'm a big fan of saying that just because you're a programmer doesn't mean you don't have to know about writing, or just because you're doing one thing doesn't, so right. Every related hobby or interest will make you better at everything else you're doing. So I find it just gives you more to pull from. And writing is a very complicated task. Again, to go back to the example, just because you can read a language doesn't mean you can write poetry. Like you may know the letters, but you can't formulate it in a way that's kind of artistic in a certain way, And like learning how to write good dialogue or whatever, there'll be plenty of times in your life if you're making games or if you're writing copy to describe your game, if you're trying to pitch it on Steam's description pages, you will need to learn how to write. And you may not think of that as writing in a classical sense, but it's all writing. You have to write to sell your game. You have to write your taglines. You have to write to convince people of your ideas. Like you're writing your whole life. And so learning how to write, just generally what it means and how to approach it, is a great tool. I could do this forever, so I won't. There
was a follow-up question on what about gamer programming books? And there were a couple recommendations. One for Beautiful Code, which I don't think I've seen. And then game programming patterns, which I've recommended many times.
So if we're going programming, so the thing is, I'm thinking about which level to go. So yeah, we'll stick with games. So this is a really great one. This book is fantastic for game programming game AI by example.
Oh, okay.
So what's really good about it is now it's C++, so you might be a little bit daunted at first, but I'll put it this way, I don't really write C++, and I still read this fine. It's not about that. It's about making you kind of think through the process of AI and sort of teaches you about state machines and how to write steering behaviors and those kinds of engines and stuff. So it makes you, it kind of demystifies a lot of that complexity around game programming. And a book in a similar vein, which I think is just valuable in general, and this kind of ties into the other topic. If we're talking about the related fields, a common question we get is, do you have to be good at maths to be a programmer or to be a game dev? Do you have to be good at physics to be a programmer or a game dev or whatever? And the answer is not really, but kind of. And so I'm actually really bad at both physics and maths. I'm good enough to do my job, but I'm not very good at it separately. And oftentimes I'll defer to other people. And so I needed this book. This one might be hard to see. It's called The Nature of Code by Daniel Schiffman. And there's an online version that's better because it's got interactive demos, but effectively it's called Nature of Code. And so I recommend this one because it actually covers a wide array of topics that start with the basics of writing your own physics engine. And I say physics engine, I'm talking about like Euler integration with a little bit of acceleration and velocity. Like, it's not crazy, but that one will get you started with physics and maths, how to program your own pendulums, how to understand how to do, like, what is a sine wave, how does it apply for building geometry that's like why do you want pseudo-random numbers and not random numbers? It covers a lot of topics that'll get you to like fluid simulations and other crazy cool stuff, and like L systems and drawing your own complex like it's really cool. Like it'll cover a lot of stuff. And that's sort of, this is one of the ones which really expanded a lot of areas that I was missing.
What was the title of that one again?
The Nature of Code.
The Nature.
And like I said, there's an online version of that, which is interactive with demos. It uses P5.js, which is my new go-to language when I'm teaching people programming.
Is this okay? Natureofcode.com. It looks like. I'll just drop the link down here.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and so I think that's a good place to stop. Maybe. One that I always say, but I won't elaborate because it's kind of like just generally the Head First series is good. The Head First series, it can feel a bit cartoony the first time you pick them up, and you're like, this feels like it's goofy and not really. It makes me feel like an idiot. But after a while, you'll hit a topic you don't know, and then you'll be glad that they're treating you like an idiot. So I would say be fair to these books because they may seem cartoonish and not very valuable, but like they do cover complicated topics. And there's a whole series. Like there's the one on design patterns. There's can I pull this without destroying my shelf? Maybe. There's one on object-oriented analysis and design. Like they've got tons and tons of books in the series, and they're all pretty good. I would say this one is my favorite just because of the topic, design patterns. Don't go crazy with it though. Like this isn't like learning how to stamp your code. If you do get this book and read it, don't just read it for the code examples. Read what they're saying, how you use them, and how you apply them. I've seen too many people read this book and come away with it as if they've just been given solutions to paste into their code. But instead, it's not. It's trying to teach you how you solve problems. And that's why I like these books, because they start with examples of Jimmy has a guitar shop and he wants to sell more guitars. How do you design that system? And it talks you through the problems and the subsequent solutions. I think it's a really good structure for education. So that one's great. And I will stop there.
I feel like we need to set up a book club and just get people reading them all. There's so many. Just start reading through them all together.
I would just recommend the Manga Guide to Databases. That's very good.
Yeah. Oh, he's not kidding.
No, I'm serious.
That's a real book. Yeah,
Manga Guide to Physics, Manga Guide to they're actually pretty entertaining and good.
The Manga Guide to Math is the one that is great. I read that one.
So there was another super chat question about the last time you used Visual Studio, which for me, to be honest, has been a long time. And they're curious how the Unity workflow has improved over Writer. I mean, I do use it somewhat regularly, but not enough to notice the differences anymore in Visual Studio, because I'd say Writer 95% of the time, and maybe 5% I'll hop into Visual Studio to record some like tutorial or something where I don't want to show an editor that'll confuse people. What about you, Jason? Are you still in Writer all the time, or are you back and forth?
No, I'm not, but for a very particular reason. It's down to what tools you need. I use Writer 90% of the time because 90% of the time I work in Unity. But if I'm doing ASP.NET stuff, .NET Core stuff, Azure stuff, Visual Studio just has better integrations. Yeah. So I actually prefer Writer now. I think it's my favorite of them. But for example, if you're using WinForms or you're building a WPF application, Writer's tooling for that is just pants. It's just bad. Yeah. It's just not
Visual Studio, I think, is better for anything other than Unity development, at least in my experience, for C#. Yeah. If I was doing anything else, I would probably do it in Visual Studio. The tooling is just
I have not opened a Unity project in Visual Studio since like 2 months into me using Writer. Just haven't
been a while for me, like since I don't know. I know that the integration is definitely better. Because when I use it, like I can see things showing up more, but it's still not as good as Writer. Like Writer still shows things like layers, like auto completing, and there's a bunch of little things. And every time I switch back and forth, I notice the missing things. But it's hard for me to remember what they are until I go to hit the hotkey and it doesn't work anymore.
So one thing, actually, can you bring up that last question there, or that last comment?
Which one?
The price? Yeah, the price one, because that's something that I want to address this. So I hear this a lot. People say Writer is very expensive for non-professionals who just want to mess around with it. I would say I would counter this multiple different ways. The first one being that realistically, if you are going to be professional at some stage, or that's your goal, you'll be using the tools professionals are using. And so I often recommend, like, people say this about 3D modeling, like, should I learn on the tools that are free or should I learn on the tools that people use in industry? It may sound like it, but it may sound like it's a costly thing, but you should invest in yourself. And you're going to have to learn these tools at some stage, and you might as well learn them when you can. So I would recommend, one, actually try and use the tools that you think you'll be using at an enterprise level. But forget about that in particular. Specifically with Writer, Writer's business model has been to usurp Visual Studio for so long. And so the way they're doing it is they're getting you hooked early so that when you're a student, you can then just migrate into it and it'll be your tool of choice in industry. So they'll do everything in their power to give you a copy of Writer for free. Like, people don't realize this. If you're a student, if you're going back to work, if you've got any excuse whatsoever, they've got an entire link on their website to just try to give you Writer for free. If you can justify it in any way, if you're an educator and you've got a classroom full of students, if there's any excuse where it's not just you trying to get a free copy, they will just give out free copies of Writer. Because for them, it's very smart to get people using Writer like early on at the start of their career when they're just learning and messing about, so that when their company is paying for the licenses, their company is going to ask, what tools do we need? And all the devs are going to say, we all want a copy of Writer. And then they can charge them for like the enterprise cost scaled version of that app. So I guarantee you, if you think Writer's too expensive, there's ways for you to get it for free legally from Writer. You just have to Google it. Just figure it out.
Yeah. A lot of podcasts and things that I listen to even give away copies. Like, they get copies from Writer that they just give away to listeners. It's not like Coding Blocks, one of the podcasts I listen to all the time, and they give away Writer licenses, I think, like every week. Like,
oh yeah, no, I forgot. Yeah.
And we're giving away 3 Writer licenses.
Yeah, and they're also free for open source projects. So like I said, if there is any excuse at all for why it's something that is like not enterprise, they'll give it to you. Like, seriously.
For me, like, I get, like, it could be pricey too, but like for me, it's been like more. I've saved more money just in time and energy with Writer, like the things that it has recommended and the learning that it's given me. And
to put things in perspective,
I mean, it varies based on where you are too, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to put things in perspective, like, as a professional, I used to pay like 150 for ReSharper, or 70 or 85, I think it was. Then I would pay another 120 for nCrunch, and then I had there was a whole bunch of tools that were all separate because I just needed to plug into Visual Studio. But a lot of that stuff is baked into the ecosystem. Now, I will admit I don't like their cheeky pricing between Writer and Writer Ultimate, and if you want the unit testing tools, you need Writer Ultimate, and you end up having to buy the suite, and some of it's a little bit annoying, I'll give it that. But like, Writer in its totality, if you pay for the whatever version, it has everything I need. It is cheaper than it used to cost me to buy individual licenses of things. And realistically, once you're doing it at a professional level, the cost is nothing. Like, if you're making X thousand every few months based on projects, then 150 a year is nothing, right? So it comes down to investing in yourself or finding a copy for free. I genuinely think it's worth getting. And again, not sponsored. I just genuinely think it makes my life easier.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I mean, I think that if you don't use Writer too, it's hard to see, like, over the free version, right? Like, you have this free one from Microsoft who made the thing. Like, it's very hard to see the difference. But when you're in there like day after day using it, you start to just, like, you'll feel much faster. At least for me, is that when I did it, I forced myself to use Writer for a month. I was like, okay, I'm not going to use any other editor for 1 month, because it's really difficult to like make the switch. So it's like, I force it, I'll do it. And then at the end of the month, I'll decide what I want to do. At the end of the month, there was no question. There was zero chance I was going back to Visual.
Well, I already knew I was going to be sold anyway, because I'd been using Visual Studio for 6 years or so. Then someone put me on to ReSharper. And ReSharper is, for people who don't know, it's a plugin from JetBrains that plugs into Visual Studio and gives you a lot of what are now Writer features. So before Writer was what it was, there was this thing called ReSharper, which is sort of like a de facto solution that a lot of devs would put onto Visual Studio. But that was a not very ideal relationship, because ReSharper would break every time Microsoft would change their contracts. And likewise, Microsoft would see what people are doing inside of ReSharper, and they would steal the features, and you get things like Code Lens, which were added long after, which were basically stolen features from ReSharper, which is fine. It's a sensible business practice. But the point is, it wasn't worthwhile for them to keep this sort of rat race going. And so I'd been using what is effectively JetBrains architecture on top of Visual Studio for years. So when they were migrating to their own editor, I already knew it was going to be valuable to me. And what helped as well is it's lighter weight. So you don't really realize it until you start using Visual Studio for a long time, but it is a beast of a piece of software. It's got so much bloat in there. It's not bad, but it's like you don't realize that. Yeah, it's really old, and it's also like it's designed for things that you've probably never used. There's an entire suite of Azure integration stuff, database migration stuff. There's a ton of stuff for ADO.NET integration. People don't even realize you can make UML diagrams in it. There's tons of other modeling. There's so many features that are there and kind of way up the application that realistically never get used. So that's why a lot of people move to Visual Studio Code, and yeah.
It's not. I remember the first version of Visual Studio I remember using was 2003 with ReSharper, because that was the only way you could do like rename. So if you wanted to like rename a variable, you had to have ReSharper to rename the variable. Otherwise, you had to go find every instance of it, because Visual Studio and there were a lot of other things like that, like just simple refactors, things that you take for granted that came as features of ReSharper that were like integrations into Visual Studio. And now,
yeah. Really?
Yeah. I mean, and it also took like 5 minutes to open up a project with ReSharper too. So it opened up the C++, like it opened up like Vanguard, open up the project, and it'd be about 5 minutes, maybe 10, before ReSharper was done syncing the project. You could actually use.
And every so often it would like fail the IntelliSense, and you'd have to go through this, like close it down and restart it again. You'd waste another 5-10 minutes. It was exhausting.
Yeah, it could be bad. Yeah, but I mean, it was mandatory. You had to have it, or else it was really difficult to do things.
Yeah, I didn't know that all that refactoring integration was because of ReSharper being made. I thought that I thought that was parts of that were in there before ReSharper.
They just slowly started adding. I think ReSharper was just kind of ahead of the game on that, while Visual Studio side was working on.
Yeah, there was. So there was a thing that was released on GitHub called Power Tools, and Power Tools was like. Yeah. So Power Tools was like this modified set of tools that was community driven that added some features. And so Power Tools was the closest thing that gave a lot of those bonuses. But ReSharper added all of the like scaled project scanning stuff that would like detect loops automatically and do anything that was like application scale was pretty much all came from ReSharper. All of the Visual Studio stuff tended to be anything that would refactor a single script was built into Visual Studio, but anything that would refactor across a project mostly came from ReSharper stuff.
Interesting. Cool.
Somebody was asking what you use to build a game engine if you do that in Visual Studio, and I would say yes. I mean, Visual Studio, you would use C++ and probably Visual Studio to build a game engine. If I were building a game engine, that's probably where I would be. And that's where everybody that I know that's written their own custom engine at a company, that's pretty much what they use.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? Like it's kind of like saying, what tools do you need to write a book? Well, you can write a book on Post-it notes, or you can use a typewriter, or you can use a PC. Like, it doesn't actually matter. It matters what workflow works for you. And so I think a lot of people would probably use Visual Studio or something like that. But
for a game engine, yeah.
Yeah, but you can pretty much use whatever. Like, isn't what's his name? The guy who made Braid, blanking on names.
Damn it.
It's bothering me now. Anyway, the guy who made Braid, and the witness.
Blow?
Thank you, Jonathan Blow. He's making his own game and his own game engine and his own compiler and his own language, and he's doing all of it predominantly in Notepad. That's basically the whole thing.
Yeah. But I wouldn't build a game engine like that. If you're building your own game, that was your own game engine, and it was. I mean, sorry, I was thinking of game engine as like you're building a game engine to release to other people. Or maybe you would. I don't know.
Yeah, I personally miss my IntelliSense, but so I wouldn't myself. I would need my tooling. But he says that he hates all the IntelliSense stuff, and yeah, I don't. I'm a big fan. So
I love it all. Yeah, it just speeds me up, makes me code faster. There was another question on thoughts on nested prefabs and too many game objects and stuff. So, do you use much nested prefabs, Jason?
not really. I only use them for UI, where I have like I would make something like a specific password input box, or I would make an item repeater, and I would put the item repeater in a view that's a UI component or whatever. I don't normally use it for actors or game stuff very often.
I found that I very rarely use them as well. I use variants a lot more, but nesting is relatively rare. But that question comes up a lot, like on people just wanting to know if they should use nested prefabs. So interesting. Going through the questions, seeing what else is up in here. So people asking about it. I don't know anything about any good 2D game engines. I don't know if either one of you guys do. It's just never been something I've been too interested in. I use Unity's 2D stuff, but nothing else.
I don't know any offhand, but I will say I've seen at least 5 or 6 different examples of YouTube channels where somebody's either making a game or game engine from scratch. And you can just follow along the process. So if you're genuinely curious, like Google it and check on YouTube, and you'll find somebody who's documenting a like 400-hour journey. I've seen multiples of these where they're making a game from scratch in whatever language. So it really comes down to just find somebody doing it, and you can watch them and follow along.
I mean, you could use stuff like RPG Maker for a 2D game engine, although RPG Maker now I think has the 3D component with the last iteration, but you can do that and make a full game from nothing. I think
that's always a good idea. I've always thought like people should do that more often, like get in there and actually build out a game. I always wish, like when I was a kid, man, if I was like 12 and RPG Maker had existed back then, like I would have never left my room, just sitting there making RPGs all day long. Like that stuff didn't exist when I was a kid, and like I'm just amazed that people don't do more of that. Just getting in there.
I was part of the Flash generation, so I did a lot of stuff with the Adobe Flash things and making games in that. So yeah,
RPG Maker is actually pretty fun. It's got all the hooks. I remember I don't know how long it was ago with the kids, but they were trying it out, and they managed to just make like a full little loop, little quest thing. They were dealing with triggers and stuff like that. So it's pretty deep, pretty involved. And I'm talking about RPG Maker. I think this was like 5 or something. And they had just introduced, I think, the notion of getting assets from someone else and integrating them, kind of like a Unity thing. So and that's I think that's 2 or 3 iterations ago. So if you want a 2D engine to mess around with, RPG Maker is actually really solid.
And again, like we've said this before, but it doesn't tooling doesn't matter. Like just pick something that lets you be creative. Like for example, there's that Dreams game on PlayStation. That's such a great way to just learn how to mess with stuff. It's like you've got loops and logic, and you can place models down, and you can take examples from other people, and there's just tons of stuff. So like you don't have to pick a particular engine or library or language or whatever. Just there's so many tools out there to learn something, and generally most of them will be valuable in some way. One question here that I think is worth asking or worth answering is the idea of, do you need to learn programming through an IDE or a simple text editor? So I've heard this as well. A lot of people say, oh, you should learn through a text editor. And a lot of people will, which I think is a bad idea, will make tutorials where they will teach people just using the text editor. Now, their reasoning is it's simpler. There's less stuff. We can just focus on the code. And they think it makes it clearer. But it doesn't, in my mind, because people like panic with the idea of writing command console stuff, and they can't follow along as easily. So I think it's a bad idea to teach people through text editor. I think you should give them a tool that's got some kind of help and IntelliSense.
Agreed.
As for if it's a good idea to learn that way, I would say though, to counter that, my first Java lecturer used to have us do an exam where it was a paper exam where we'd have to write out the code with pencil and paper, and we'd have to write out the systems. And loads of people in the class hated that because they didn't have the compiler to help them out when it went wrong.
It was actual code or pseudocode? It was just like,
actual. You'd write actual code, public static void main out with the pencil.
Oh, wow.
And I actually really liked it because it forced me to understand what each word was, because I had to learn. Like one of the funniest things now is one of the biggest issues I used to have was the concept of properties versus arguments. And so I would have that public void set health and then int health and then health equals health. And that idea of health equals health used to just drive me insane. I didn't understand why this makes no sense. What am I doing? And so having to write it out on paper made me see the differences. And it kind of taught me to do things like, maybe I'll call this one new health and this one health, and suddenly it's easier to read and understand. And so I think it's valuable to learn how to write code, either like something dumb, like on paper or in a notepad or console or something, just because it's good to clear your mind and think about it that way. But I wouldn't start there. I think it actually makes it harder for you. But I do think once you're comfortable writing loops and code, challenge yourself to try to write something with all the tools taken away. And if you find that you can't write code without the tools, then you're in a bad place. So learn to do it, but like maybe not start that way.
Yeah. Whenever I am messing with programming stuff, I like to try to just open a file and try to do it from scratch, just to see how much I'm just like not like absorbing passively with all of the bells and whistles. And it's it's always a learning experience when you do that stuff. So that paper thing sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I always write my code in the editor because
You don't use a typewriter?
No, I used to.
Oh man. I want you to program something using a typewriter.
Ran out of ribbon.
Can we get 1,000 likes? If we can get 1,000 likes, will you?
Oh man, yeah. If we get 1,000 likes, I'll write a program on a typewriter. There you go. I will find a typewriter somewhere and I will write some code on it and I will send it to you and it will compile.
I will get you a typewriter.
I will mail it to you. Mail you the code.
Snail mail the.
Right. You can come pick it up. But there was another super chat that just came in, so I figured I'll pop that one up about the position of Unity scripts and just where you put things. So the question was, should the Unity methods be at the top of the script, like start and update, or should public things go first, followed by private, or should the whole thing just read like a linear story? I have my own personal opinions on this, and I think that it's probably going to vary from person to person. Personally, what I like to do is put those. I do like to have the awake method up at the top if I'm using an awake, and then the start method right below that, and then usually the update method right below that if I'm using any of those three. And then I'll put all of my public methods, if there are any, followed by private methods. And when I'm putting the public and private methods, they will be very much lined up like a story to the degree that they're staying in that order, so that the private things are still after the public things. And the main reason is that when I open up a Unity script, I want to know immediately if anything magical is happening, like in awake or update or start or any other Unity event that's getting called. I want to know about it like right when I open it and not have to scroll through and figure out which ones of those are used. The other things I feel like I can kind of grasp the references on really easy and understand which ones of those methods are used by which objects. It can always just get kind of mixed up for me. So I like to keep those right up at the beginning and just make it really obvious. What about you, Jason? I assume you got some very strong on this.
So
and I think it's going to vary from person to person, but curious what yours are.
I will say you're right. It does vary a lot. But specifically this question more than any other, I am completely left field. I'm well aware that the way I do this, I've not met anybody else who does it the way I do it. And I know it's against the usual standards. But just for context, most people will structure it such that it has an entry point, and then you walk down the script logically as it flows each linear line of code. So you start with the awake, then the start, then whatever function is called in start, then whatever function is called in that function, and so on. And that way, there's the least amount of eye travel to understand the technical flow of the application. And that's fine. That's a perfectly valid way to do it. I don't do it that way because, from my experience, while it is true that sometimes you open a script with the intent of finding out what it does, I find more often than not, if you name things correctly, you should guess what things do. So, for example, if I have a script called Spawner, and I'm going to open a script called Spawner that I didn't write. Am I actually trying to look at the awake function of that, or am I trying to see what it does and how it does it? To me, the most interesting function in that class is called spawn, because that's the thing that most likely it does and what I use it for. So I structure my scripts instead by the thing you will probably be here to look at if you open my script. So things that are helper functions and utility classes and whatever, I throw all that crap at the bottom. They're like, if you want to see the details of how this works, you can go down there. If you want to see, if you open a script and your intent is to change its functionality, in other words, it does this, but it should do this, you're probably changing the core function or the core loop. Or if you're looking at it to say, why is it doing this and not this? You'll probably start with the core, I called this function, why is that function not doing what I expect it to? So I put the public functions that have the most primary features that are like the thing the class is for right there in front of you. And then I follow the similar rule of if that function calls other functions, they're underneath, so you have the least amount of eye travel to go through it. I don't really care as much about the awakes and starts simply because there's the checkbox. If your class has no awakes and starts, there's no checkbox in the top left corner because it can't start anything. If it does have awake and start, it has the checkbox, which just tells me at a glance it has those things. I do oftentimes, if there is something important happening in awake or start, I will put it at the top. If I'm like pooling a bunch of stuff in a spawning class, then it's like, you will need to know this when reading my script. But if it's just doing some grabbing variables or initializing things, you don't really care that I'm like calling get component on 5 things. That's like, if you need to know where do I get the things from, you can ask that, but you're probably there to see if spawn, do spawn stuff. So again, I'm not recommending everyone do this because literally I'm the only person I know that does it like this. But I find for myself, I like going back to my old scripts, and when I open them and I want to change their behavior, the first method I see is most likely the reason I'm there that I've opened the script in the first place.
So you just keep the meat at the top and leave all the potatoes just underneath.
All at the bottom, yeah. Just right at the bottom.
Nice. Yeah, I think that makes sense. What about for the rest of the stuff? Do you have so you've got your key things right up there at the top. Do you have a preference on how you order the other things, or?
I do, and again, this is another one I know people don't like. I put all of my fields right at the bottom, except for ones that display in the inspector. I know that freaks people out. Most people have their order as they do their fields. They do their constructors and awakes, followed by their public methods. As far as I'm concerned, this giant list of 15 or 12 variables at the top tells me nothing. If I've never opened the script before and it says time is true, is alive, is awake, does this, I'm like, cool. I know it's got a bunch of fields.
Too big.
Well, yeah, probably. But whatever properties or fields are in this, I just dump all that crap at the bottom because that's implementation details. It's not the functionality. The only stuff that goes to the top is if it's configurable by you and the inspector. If you want to see what and that's mostly because of the way Unity draws it. If it didn't draw it that way, I would put it at the bottom, but I have to, so it maintains the draw call order. So I put dependencies at the top, private fields, that is. I put all the serialized private fields. I put all the other private fields, all the properties, all the other stuff right at the bottom. And then in order, it's the main functions followed by the secondary functions, and then all of the private stuff is hidden mostly down below. So in order, it should be anything you would interact with. Variables you interact with, followed by functions you interact with, followed by functions that might help those functions work, followed by all the private stuff, followed by all the variables that are needed to make that stuff work. So in order, if you're literally digging into my script for the sake of digging into it, you're going to go to the bottom of it anyway. If you're looking at it to learn a piece of information about how it works, you don't need to learn about all of the individual variables I'm using and whether I'm using an array or whatever. And yes, I do use a region for that bottom stuff. For all of this stuff, I usually call it plumbing, and I just put a big giant region around anything that I think you don't care about unless you're actively looking for it. So I have a bunch of stuff and then a big plumbing region that contains all the crap that you can look at if you care about.
Man, you just gave Jason like a partial aneurysm by saying you put the variables at the bottom. But man,
I don't like that.
And then put a region around it. Hold on.
It makes a whole lot of sense to me though. Like I like the fields and just like the main things that you're gonna probably mess with more likely, just being right there in your face. And if you want to know more, then it's all there. It's still organized in a fashion.
Well, it's just because we had this conversation before, right? And it comes down to asking yourself, why do you do things? Like, it comes down to the defaults of, if you ask 90% of programmers, they'll say, how do you structure your code? Well, all the variables, then the constructor, then the whatever. And I'm like, why? Like, what does that do for you?
Because that's what C++ required.
Oh,
That is why. I mean, that's really the reason, though, that does happen. But yeah, I can see the argument for what you're saying there too, though. It does have some merit for sure. I feel I personally I don't really run into that case where like I have a hard time finding things anymore because I have this habit of just decimating my classes into being tiny so that they can't ever get too big like that. But it does make sense to not have. I've seen plenty of those code files where it's just like 100 variables up at the top and you're scrolling forever to try to find what the thing does.
A good example of this, right? Say you're doing some UI element, you're doing like some input box that has like an avatar image and some name field and a health bar, like a little character avatar thing. In order to make that work, you're probably going to need some sort of you're going to need like a text meshes. You're going to need some sort of images to draw that stuff on. There's probably like 10 or so little things between sprites and images and various stuff that isn't really the code. It's just like the literal UI elements you're using. Now, some people prefer the get component calls. I've said this before, any work I can do at build time, at edit time before the project builds, I'll take. And so rather than calling get component, which we're basically out of wake, it does a whole load of stuff, I will just drag it in myself, especially if it's a prefab that I can do it once and it's permanently hooked up correctly. So I know I'm going to expose like 5 or 6 things in the inspector. And if I know I'm going to do that, it's just a lot of stuff, like a lot of visual crap. And so stuff like that to me is sort of like, there's going to be a lot of variables, but they're not really very informative to you to look at. And so when it's stuff like that, I try to avoid wasting too much like screen real estate. You should be able to open a script and the first page should show you the most valuable stuff.
Yeah, that seems like good advice to me. I like this comment though in the chat that workplace makes them put everything in alphabetical order.
Like what? Like all the variables have to be in alphabetical order?
I'm guessing.
I assume it's functions of variables. Yeah. Now I will say that's the other thing too, which I will concede to. The way I do it, I will do it for myself. If I'm giving code to somebody for their project, you always use the project conventions. Always, under every circumstance. Even if you don't like it, if they're using underscores, you use underscores. If they're using any other thing, use their thing. Just don't try to be smart and write your own code differently just so you know it's your code. That's going to make a mess for everybody and you're going to have a hard time yourself reading it. Follow whatever the coding convention is on the project you're on.
Totally agree. You got to make it match. More important than anything else. Even if it's a bad style, make it match the bad style. Last thing you want is multiple styles of code in the project.
Jason always taught me that it has to be his way no matter what. So.
That's right. That's the one way. It's got to match.
We call that Jason's Law. So we all say that.
There's a question Rob asked, when do you scroll through a script in totality? Surely you bounce around by reference. Personally, most of the time I can scroll through most scripts and they're relatively quick. The bouncing around by reference is going from script to script, finding the cross script references. But a lot of the time, like my general target is to keep a script under 200 lines. Like if it's over 200 lines, I start, not always, but I usually start to think about how I can refactor it. And if there are some opportunities to simplify it, shrink it down, or if there's just stuff I'm doing that's wasteful in there or something else that I can make it easier to understand and grasp. So I'm
a big fan of that too. Yeah.
I just bounce around. So I do scroll through them a lot. I'll even like zoom out a lot and be able to see the whole script if I like shrink it down small enough and then zoom back in on the part that I want. But there's still a lot of bouncing around between files. So yeah.
Like I'm a big fan of the concept of collaborators or so if you're doing composition of your code, so say for example you're building some inventory system and it's a big fancy inventory. A lot of the inventory stuff is inventory plumbing, adding an item, removing an item, getting a list of items and whatever. Now you could put all of that stuff there as well as the other inventory related stuff, or you could make an inventory class that just has inventory base logic and that can be used as if its own collection type inside of a larger, like fancier inventory system. And so if there's some part of the code of some script you're doing which does a bunch of related stuff, I'll often make some class that does that, and I'll instantiate that class in the awake function, and it'll use its own tool to simplify a lot of that code. And that's how I also get to the under the 200 lines thing. So I do that a lot myself. But just the last note in that last question on when do you scroll through? Well, the truth is, if you're trying to solve a bug or you're working on code that's got an issue, you'll probably be going reference to reference. If you are adding a feature, you're probably going to a function and then reading how the code works and trying to make sure the new feature doesn't cause regressions. So the answer is mostly you're looking to scroll through a script when you're trying to add a new feature to an existing piece of behavior. And that's where seeing how it works in order of the call the user made seems more important to me than how the awake function of the script works.
Yeah. Good answer. There was a question that popped up. I thought it was kind of funny and interesting about, is it still true that for every 1,000 lines of code, there's one mistake that's not found? And I don't know that it necessarily, like the IDEs don't make any difference with that. I don't know the info on that actual stat, but it does sound probably relatively realistic. At least every 10,000 lines, there's definitely one.
Yeah.
I don't know about every 1,000, depending on the project, but yeah, I mean, improved code and improved IDEs doesn't really stop mistakes. It just makes it easier for you to, I guess, write testing and tooling around it. But most people don't do that.
Yeah.
So
I will say maybe stuff like the fact that you've got type safety with variables and it can detect whether you're using the correct names. Like there's a lot of little helpers that probably make it easier. But I mean, I would say bugs aren't as big of an issue as people think, as weird as that sounds. Like realistically, if you write your code and such, the reason bugs are an issue is when people get into the bad habit of sitting down and writing 1,000 lines in a row. If you do that, you will definitely introduce bugs once every 1,000 lines because you'll sit there and just write a whole load of stuff and hope it all works. If you start doing this more often, you'll start writing 50 lines or 100, check that it works, 50 lines or 100, check that it works. And then the only bugs that are going to happen is going to be when systems interconnect in ways you don't expect. And so if you use other tools like unit testing or anything else, you'll mitigate these things happening more often. So the truth is, like, keep in mind, a lot of these old conventions came from the world where you had to write out the code and then like send it to be compiled, like send it to different people to either type out on punch cards or to actually like put them into the machine. And so there was a real panic about making sure that you didn't have any mistakes, because a mistake might take you half an hour of going through the whole process all over again because of a single typo. These days, that's not an issue. So it's not so much that it stops you having bugs, it's that bugs don't have that same cost as they used to. It's only like obviously in financial systems where bugs can be detrimental, but if you write smart code in small chunks, use testing tools, it's not really that much of an issue anymore.
When you have more time, I think, to catch and fix them before they go to production in a lot of environments, especially in games. In games, you got lots of time to catch and fix your bugs before they go out, unless it's like a live game that you're updating. But there was another question about line width too, and I just wanted to mention this because I actually do kind of stick by this. Like the general rule was like 80. I don't go down to 80 80 characters per column, but I usually like at 120 is like where I'll cap off. I could go obviously like super long, but I think it slows down your reading when you're scanning too far across, and it makes it just harder to share with other people. You share with somebody else who doesn't have as wide a monitor or is trying to put this into a smaller thing like side by side on a 1080p screen. You got to make it readable, and making it long doesn't usually make it any better. It's just like, I don't know. I like to stick to about 120. I don't know about you. I'm
about 122, but I would say more than that. It's like people focus too much on character width as if that's a limitation. Again, that came from the idea of a terminal, and a terminal had X number of characters, and people would try to stay on the terminal width. That doesn't matter. What matters is if you follow modern convention, which is a lot less about being sparse and more about reading like prose, and you're trying to make your code read in clean language, then don't make your breaks on character counts, make your breaks on the equivalent of sentence structure. So if I'm doing something and it's if blank and it uses 5 variables, if it's short, I would go if blank variable, 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 whatever. But if the variable names are long, I would go if blank variable, comma, variable, 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 because it might read better depending on what I'm doing. So I don't really care about the line count as much as I care about if I read it like a sentence in a book, does it feel like it's hard to read? And if it is, I might encapsulate something, move it down, and whatever else. So just like use your best judgment. Make it not difficult for you to read on a standard monitor, and don't use your monitor width as some kind of guide. Just because there are such things as ultra wides, and just because people have vertical monitors with like the ability to show hundreds of lines at a time, don't use those metrics. Try to be sane. Assume everybody's on a like 1920 by 1080 16:9 or something, and just be judicious with your space.
Yeah, assume you got to look at it on a laptop. Like, you got to work on it there. Like that was one of the things that I struggled with at first too, was like separating out all the parameters and making them be on separate lines. It used to drive me nuts. I'd see that, I'm like, no, why are these like this to go wider? It took me a long time to realize that it can go wider, but it just makes it harder to count, like, which number is this? Which variable is this? This is position 5 or 10 or 11 or 10. Like, if they're one after another, it's very easy. I can just count down and see them, and it's easier to...
And this is why, like you'll notice a theme to a lot of these questions, which is like, what is the right answer to line length or line height or variable names? And I can't stress this enough. I keep saying the answer is use decent judgment. Like, yes, there are some general practices, but at the end of the day, you are a programmer. You are sitting there looking at code. Do you like looking at code with lots of variables in a line? Do you like using code that's using bad variable names? No. So like you can do a lot of this if you just take a step back and ask yourself if you like using the code. So like, yes, there are certain guidelines and stuff that people suggest, but realistically, like, write code you would like to read, and that will automatically answer 70% of your questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and just go back and change it until it's easier to read. So there was a super chat about agile methodology, wondering if it refers to coding practices or management style.
Well, it's more about project management specifically, but that's a very big question.
Right. Yeah, and it's much more about the management of the project and the planning for how features are going to be added into the project, right?
Yeah. So I guess I'll give it a little breakdown. So back in the olden days, the common approach was called a waterfall. And waterfall was basically a room full of people would sit around and say, we want to have guns in our game. That's a system. We want guns. We are going to time box 4 months. We're going to go make guns. We'll come back. Guns will be done, and we'll move on to something else. And so you'd do all the planning up front, all the documents and paperwork, and everyone would work on it. And then you'd sit down and you'd block the next 3 months, and you would then just make guns. And that was fine most of the time. But anybody who's ever worked on software for enough time notices that the biggest problem is change. Software changes all of the time. You'll get halfway through your gun system and say, "Oh, this isn't as fun as we thought." Or what if we want to pivot to using like magic spells instead of guns? Do we have to change certain things? And so what happens is, if that happens, you either have to just say, "Screw it, we'll commit to this 2 months remaining, and then we'll reassess at the end of the 2 months," or we'll stop here, go back to square one, and we'll now budget for the next 4 months. So people realized it makes a lot more sense to not give yourself too much of a time window where you have to get it right the first time, because things will change. So you end up moving into, it was originally Scrum and then the Agile Manifesto and the whole thing, but it basically means you give yourself a sprint of, we're going to make guns, but we're going to spend the first thing, let's make something that shoots, then make something that shoots bullets, then make something that can reload and can have different, effects or whatever else. And so you do the first sprint, you stop, and it should be playable. And then you assess where you are and ask yourself, if, okay, this is in a good place, do we want to continue down the path we've laid out, or do we want to move to a different path? And so it's the same structure, but it's by making smaller chunks. The term agile refers to the fact that you are able to move faster into different directions as the project changes. So it is mostly about managing your time and how much investment you're putting into the project at each stage. But it's still the same thing. You're still producing the same project. It's just most things fall into a more agile approach because it gives you a lot more freedom to support like big sweeping changes that will inevitably happen once things work. Now, to bookend that, there's like Scrum masters and like agile manifestos and all of these different things that lead into this like it sort of became an enterprise in the same way that like self-help books have an industry around self-help and there's classes and tons of stuff and there's a lot of crap in there. The same goes for agile and that kind of thing. There are people who make their money going company to company selling agile or selling scrum, and there's special cards with printed stuff and all this. And I'm not saying it's not useful, but I'm saying it's been twisted into like a lifestyle as opposed to a tool to help you write better code. So if you strip it back and say agile is the thing that makes it easier to react to programming changes, great. If you're saying agile is this thing where I'm wearing my agile hat and I have my meetings and I'm using the cards and we time box our meetings to 10 minutes exactly because that's what it says in the book, then you're getting into silly territory where it's not helping you. So you have to be practical about what it's doing to help you versus when it's just a business thing. So
yeah, there's a lot of chat about waterfall in agile too. And I mean, I still see like even when I think about like a MMO expansion, it's closer to a waterfall type release with like the entire thing being planned out long in advance and built. And there isn't a whole lot. I mean, it's certainly been, I'd say it's restructured to seem more agile and be a little bit more, but it's nowhere near like at the level that I see like in an enterprise thing where like there's constant change and direction, like, you know, every week and retrospecting on like the last 2 weeks and changing direction and updating based on that. Like it feels like, at least in my experience with the bigger projects and even with games like pre-launch when they're not out and they're not getting updates, that they're a little bit closer to a waterfall than agile. It's kind of interesting thinking about it because like I like agile workflows and stuff, and I think it works good for games, but I see that of most game stuff I don't think is really very agile the way that it's built. I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing too, is I would say in general, the amount of companies that are agile and follow the exact agile principles are very few. Most people use some sort of mismatched hodgepodge solution that works for them. And some people see that as a failing, as they weren't able to commit to one or the other. I see that as literally the point. These tools are meant to make your work better or faster or easier. And you should take the parts that help you and don't use the parts that don't. Yeah. And so, for example, one of the core tenets of the original agile stuff was it should always be in a complete, it's shippable state. At the end of every 2-week cycle or month cycle, you should always be able to potentially ship there. Every new feature should either be included or it's not completed and it gets moved to the backlog. Now, that's something which in experience is not super practical. You can't always have your app at the perfect, like, oh, we could just press ship right now. It's a good deal to aim for, but sometimes there's some larger system that you're like mulling over or integrates other stuff or whatever. And so like you don't need to follow it to that exact letter, but the idea, if you're making something like a game, of having it buildable and playable as often as possible to get new feedback about where you should go is a good one. And so you can take the spirit of that mentality without like leaning in hard into the exact rules. And so I see a lot of people saying that, oh, well, agile only works for web stuff, or if you're doing stuff that's like incremental contracts. I don't agree. I think it's a systemic thing. If you're working on a feature, you can call that feature on a broader scope as one feature, but you can individually, personally develop it in an agile way, where you develop a part of it, test it, see if it works, part of it, test it, see if it works, and you increment your own development to be more agile to it, but you're not following like an agile architectural structure for your project. So I would just say, don't force yourself into having to use the correct tool to the exact letter. Like, do something which makes your life easier. And when it comes to building systems, if you know a system's like likely to change, build it in a more agile way than you would normally do it. So
agile should just be agile. It shouldn't be using the agile system shouldn't feel stiff.
Yeah.
There was another question I just popped up on just clean code and integration, I guess. They have a variable that keeps track of their health that only needs to exist during battles, but characters exist outside of battles as well. So how would you implement such a variable? And I mean, we were talking a little bit about separation of health systems earlier, and how much exactly you split this all off. For me, the health is going to be tied in with whatever other systems are going to be doing this combat stuff. So if there's some specific combat script that's dealing with combat between characters, it would probably just be on that script and not be doing anything, or be maybe even be a deactivated script while I'm not in battle and then turn it on, or just be a variable that is not really used and it's just sitting there on a component that's part of that combat system for that character. But
yeah, in my case, I would look at it and go, if it's a battle, then at some point in the middle of some part of the game, a battle starts. I would instantiate a new class called Battle, and that battle would then manage the state of that battle throughout the course of it, and then it would close out when it's done. So if a battle is an isolated thing, then just have a class which handles the battle state and the battle-related stuff. If something gets created or saved as a result of that, you can have events out of the end of that class where on completion of battle, save those things to the persistent state, and the battle is now a self-contained thing.
Why would your current hit points not be important outside of battle? Or are you full healing? Are you?
I'm guessing it's just resetting at the beginning of the battle, so you don't need to keep it around after. Like you're starting it. I mean, otherwise, yeah, your current health would probably be saved off in some persistence location, not necessarily redone. Yeah. So that's, I guess, just assuming that it's getting reset in the battle. So yeah, I would definitely keep, like, if the game is not mostly combat related and the health is like and combat thing is separate, then I would keep that code separate from the other stuff. Kind of like what Jason was saying. If it's just a separate battle thing, keep it all related to that. If it makes sense. Let's see what else we got for any other questions in here. Oh yeah, so yeah, he's saying that correct. The health is reset at the battle. So yeah, in that case, I think that makes sense. Just keeping it in the battle, assuming that the battles work that way. Cool. I don't know. Are there any other things you guys wanted to talk about? It looks like we're starting to run out of questions here. I mean, I'm sure people will pop up a million questions as I say that, but how can I find a job in this industry? Build some games is definitely my recommendation. Like, start building your own games as much as possible. Build out some samples and put up a portfolio of the stuff that you've built, or join some game jams and actually just start building games with other people and apply for things. All of the things that I feel like I got to remember to tell people. Oh, do you prefer coroutines? Here's a question, a technical one. Do you prefer coroutines or threads for heavy computation and procedural generation?
Well, I mean, I would say almost obviously threads, because threads are threaded. Coroutines are not. Coroutines are not asynchronous. So I've given this example before on Charles's channel, but so if you look at decompiled code for both, they're both state machines. That's all they are. They're just like literally a switch statement with numeric indexes for switches that do different chunks of code. There's actually a great blog post called "There's No Such Thing as Threads." It's a whole thing that explains why it's not really what you think it is. But from a computational perspective, if you can move something to threads, it's probably better. And especially with games, if you're doing generation stuff, you can also move that to GPU as well, depending on what you're doing. But yeah, I actually don't use coroutines that much, mostly because I know it's a state machine. I know all a coroutine is doing is building a state machine for me, and oftentimes I can just make my own state machine. But if it's short, I'll use that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'll use coroutines that are short, that do like maybe one thing and they need to delay a second or something, or something simple, but nothing too complicated in there. And then yeah, threads definitely. If you need to push off the heavy computation, that's the benefit of them. For anybody that doesn't know, like I mean, putting something onto another thread, if you have a multi-core system, will actually give you a relatively good benefit, because a lot of that work will get offloaded onto the other core, where using a coroutine is not going to do that. It's still all going to run essentially on the same thread and on the same core, so you're not going to get the benefits of modern computing, I guess, right? Of being able to kind of push that in the background. And one of the big reasons to do it on thread, like push it in the background and keep your main thread performance good, so that you can do all of the generation and background work while you're still giving them a pleasant experience and not stuttering and freezing or just showing a black screen or something. Although I don't do a lot of procedural generation anymore. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, not a lot, to be honest.
Let's see. So there's anything else in here. Who is asking? This question's popped up a couple times about portfolios. So what shows better off? Like if you say you're going to get a game job, what's going to be better in there? Is it having a bunch of projects showing like good use of patterns, or just a bigger project, or what's actually going to be useful? And I mean, if this is in a game programming side, I would say that the showing the patterns and algorithm stuff is good, but do that as the second part. First, show the project, because most of the people that are looking at your stuff aren't going to understand that. The people that are looking at it first, at least, like the game designers, the artists, the producers, and everybody else on the team that's looking at it, isn't going to understand the lower level stuff. You want that there for the programmers that are looking at it, but the entire team is probably going to look at your portfolio. So I'd say put the fun, interesting part that everybody can understand at the top, and a little bit of info on your actual coding skills could be useful. But a lot of that is going to come down to the actual resume or CV and the interview, where you're going to be able to get that across. It's a lot harder to get that across, I think, in a portfolio, to get across like your actual coding skills and the way that you understand how to use those things.
Plus, it depends what you're actually applying for, right? Like if you're applying to be the sole dev on a project, then they're going to want to see that you can use all of Unity's tools. If you're applying to be some sort of back-end tool developer, maybe just demonstrating you're good at tools is good enough. Maybe if you're building something that's going to be affecting the designers, showing custom inspectors and tools will be valuable. Like it comes down to the research we talked about before. If you're being hired as a tool developer, then they're going to want to see not only that you can code it, but if you can demonstrate you can create tools that are easy to grok at the start just by looking at them, that's a valuable skill. So tailor those kinds of things to where or whatever kind of job you're applying for. But in general, yeah, I think demonstrating that you can do it is more important than demonstrating that you've got your lingo down. Like I'm never impressed when someone comes in for an interview and they just start going something polymorphism, something inheritance. It's like, cool, you read some of the books that I did, but like, can you apply them? I don't know if that means anything to you, you know?
So on my next coding interview, I shouldn't like wear a polymorphism is great shirt or.
Hey, if there is one, I'd buy one of those. Yeah.
There were two more questions I want to hit. One is, what were your thoughts about using blockchain tech in games? I see people talking about it all the time now with the NFT stuff, especially. Personally, like I don't understand the benefit or see any reason that people like it or get excited about it.
I really don't like NFT. NFT drives me insane. I think it's a regressive practice, but that's not getting to that.
It's really strange to me, but people get excited about stuff, and I also admit that I'm wrong about stuff all the time too, though. So like, it may end up being like the next thing that takes over games, but I don't get it at all.
Just because I think it's dumb doesn't mean it's not going to be the next big thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
NFT stuff is weird to me, but I mean, people are.
I mean, people alone made I don't know how many million from his selling his entire. Like one guy sold one NFT and made like a lifetime's worth of money from it. So it's.
Yeah.
I just wonder if the next guy can do that. Or is this like the iOS story where like the first month was good and then very quickly declined on how easy it was?
Well, Top Shots, they just got like 300 million in funding just because like they need server infrastructure to support all the requests and all the trading and stuff. It's nuts. And that's just like collecting sports highlights, which I just don't like. It's so weird to me. But it's making money. So
it's crazy.
Yes.
But yeah, I have no good insight into it other than it seems nuts to me. And then I think I just want to wrap it on this last question, which was what things are you excited for in Unity 2021, I guess, or like I guess going forward. So for Unity, what is there anything specific you're excited about? Anybody? But for me, like the visual scripting, I'm really curious to see like how that's gonna pan out. And I'm a little bit excited about the idea of actually getting a network stack.
I'm hesitant
network on stack. Both of these. Like my excitement is very...
Network stack. Yeah, I would love a native network stack. That would be great.
Wait, they're putting the visual scripting in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they bought Bolts. Yeah.
Oh wow.
and they're integrating it in. So it seems cool. I haven't dug into it too much, so that's one of the things I'm pretty excited.
I'm one of those
about.
fools who bought it before it was bought by Unity. So I wasted my money on buying both beforehand.
I've done
It's
that
cool.
with everything that they bought.
Yeah. I'm just not a big visual scripting guy, so it doesn't really interest me too much. I think for me, the main thing is just I love the graphic fidelity improvements. Like, to be completely honest, everyone knows there's that Unity look, right? There's that sort of it looks lower quality. And the amount of times people use that as there's no good looking games made in Unity argument that's hilariously bad. Yeah. But the thing is, if you look at the latest like games made in Unity thing, now here's the thing, as far as I'm concerned, there's still a lot of repetition. I'll put it this way: the day Unity make a trailer video that doesn't include Tarkov in it is the day Unity's made it visually. They don't have to keep trotting out that poor dead horse again. But other than that, like, we're getting to the point, there's just lots and lots of really good looking and great games made in Unity. So I do think there's no specific thing, but I like the fact that their focus is on a very practical thing. Like, I find that older Unity builds felt very much like a almost like an art piece or some sort of research project, but it's only been in the last 3 years Unity feels like they're dogfooding their own tools and actually working with people to make games. And so the problems they're fixing are a lot more practical, that are stuff that devs have been dealing with. So I think the engine is becoming a lot more usable to build scalable games with. So the short answer is there's not a particular thing, but I do think the entire ethos of the company has shifted in the last few years, and it's noticeable. And I'm more interested in seeing how good the out-of-the-box solution can get, and it's only getting better.
Do you think that once they, if they keep increasing the visual fidelity and all this stuff, do you think that that will help kind of curb the Unity snob, or I guess it'd be more of an Unreal snob, who just dismisses Unity purely because of visual? They don't even investigate the functionality of it. Do you think that would help?
Well, I'm surprised that even still holds, because to me, I still think the best argument is that what is the most popular console for games right now is probably, if people would say, it's the Switch. If you're building a game, you want your game on the Switch. It's a small, curated library. Any game you put on there has got a very high chance of being bought. It's got a large, ravenous fan base who like games on the go, and games are selling really, really well. I know people who put games on the Switch, and they've made more on the Switch release the first month than they made a year on Steam. It's insane. Like, it depends on what game it is and various different rules and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, it is an entire secondary market. If you produce your game on Steam, you get one launch day. And if you ask most devs, something like 80% of your revenue will be made on that first launch day. It's like your huge amount of your revenue. And so if you get a second launch day by launching on Switch, that's just massively more income. And so to me, the biggest argument is how many platforms and how many different ways can you distribute your game? And so for that, that's the best argument for a game engine there is. And if people talk about, oh, well, Unity can't produce AAA graphics, you can't make the next Assassin's Creed in Unity, I'm like, yeah, but you can make about $1,000 million selling mobile games and portable games and Hollow Knights and whatever. Like, there's tons of games you can make that don't need that. And if that's the metric, that the game engine has to be able to produce, Assassin's Creed or whatever, that's hilariously silly to me. Like, it's so missing the point of, you're a small studio trying to make a game, use whatever engine will help you get there, that'll distribute on whatever platforms will make you the most money. And it just seems like, I don't understand that mindset, that it doesn't do this particular fidelity of realism. And even then, it's getting there. It's not as good as Unreal at the moment. I don't know. It's such a silly argument. Just don't get it.
No. Same here. Do not understand it at all. Understanding or interacting with as many tools and engines as possible just opens up possibilities for you. So it's weird to just like completely dismiss one because of some perception that it just can't visually ever be good enough. It's really weird to me. Unless like you have a very, very specific project, very specific bar they're trying to get to, which generally is going to be whatever AAA means to you or the community or society, then I don't see why you wouldn't explore multiple options.
Well, I would say just to kind of, because based on the conversation that's happening in the chat, I just want to put a little asterisk there. Like, if we're being fair, keep in mind that Unreal is what a lot of the big studios uses, which means they have a lot of pull and back and forth relationships with a lot of studios that produce games in Unreal. And when it comes to games that are releasing on on consoles like Xbox and PlayStation, they're going to have a lot of first-party titles, and so those engines are going to have a lot of to the metal optimizations that Unity won't. So if we're being fair, it's not just that Unity, it's not about competing visually as just a base level. It's the fact that Unreal will definitely have optimizations that are exclusive to Unreal because of its relationships to very well-paid companies that are able to produce products that they're going to want to release on those kind of new generation consoles. So there is a lot of magic behind the scenes in what makes Unreal both high fidelity and visually impressive, especially to do with like the new streaming stuff on PlayStation and whatever. So I'm not discounting that at all. Like there is a genuine reason why Unreal is the engine of choice if you've got a huge $1 million budget. But my point is, if you're deciding in your basement at home with you and your two friends and you're going to make a game, that you're going to pick Unreal because that is what this $1 million studio uses, you're entirely not sitting down and practically looking at your own work and what you're going to make. It's a silly metric to measure yourself by.
Yeah.
It's a very fair point. You use the right tools for the job. Well, all right, guys.
I'm looking at typewriters online right now.
You finding me a typewriter to write some code on?
You get 1,000 likes, people. Just get them.
Oh, we're only at 168 likes, so I think that I'm good. I won't have to type anything. Nobody else will hit the like button.
Come on, people.
I guess it's fine. If everybody hits, if we get to 1,000, that last video is not at 1,000, so you're safe, Salim. You don't have to write a game design doc yet. Of course, if anybody wants to go back to the last video and hit like on it and share it too, then we can do a game design doc, and maybe we could have Salim type it with a typewriter. Type up game design doc.
With a typewriter.
This is why Ireland stays neutral, by the way. We don't have to deal with this. We're neutral, and you guys can have your own war.
Oh.
That's all right, man. I think if we just get 200 likes, he'll type it on a typewriter. Half of it on a typewriter.
Just 200 is not enough. We got to at least 500. 500. I'll type on a typewriter. Click away. Turn the camera and record it. Writing code, old school style. A new video.
Yeah, Genshin is made in Unity, as far as I know. There's actually a lot more games than people realize made in Unity.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't know. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap it up?
None over here. Biomutant May 24th.
What's that?
Official. Biomutant's coming out May 24th. So
nice. Good to know that. I'll be honest.
Aren't you coming over here soon, Salim?
I'll be there
soon.
Yeah, soon.
Next couple of weeks.
Something like that, yeah.
To be honest, though, it's like 3 weeks or whatever till the next Nier game, so that's probably my one.
Oh, the Nier remake prequel, yeah. But Biomutant, man, it's like 7 years or some crazy number. Finally, yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully it's good, man. If it's not good, I'm gonna be so sad. But yeah, Nier game. I didn't realize I was also very close. So I'm excited about that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think I'd also mentioned I want to get an artist in here next time. So, and Salim, you had mentioned having possibly some people would be.
Yeah, we should probably reach out to our extended network. I know that guy Jake who's making the. You've probably seen it. If you've ever seen a game on the Unity subreddit that's basically using dots and has thousands of robots attacking this like tower defense looking thing, that's his game. Like it's everywhere at this stage. So he might have a lot to say about the newer architecture stuff that I don't, because I've not been using that. There's other people we can reach out to as well.
Yeah. There are quite a few people I'd love to just bring on and just talk more about other random stuff. So keep doing them. Talking again. So next Sunday, I guess we'll definitely be back, right, Salim?
I told you get 3.
One of these days, you got to be live from like right next to me. You can sit on my lap.
Whoa!
So, live from Jason's lap. It
escalated really quick. Where is the microphone in that situation? I don't know.
We might need separate microphones. I'll use the lapel mic since I'll be behind you.
As long as you dress up like Santa, then sure.
Oh, what else would I dress up like?
Oh my God! Wow.
Oh, I think I do have a Santa hat sitting on that night somewhere right around here.
Oh God, we have definitely just. So yes, next week.
All right, good stuff. Cool. All right, and then yeah, I guess we'll see everybody else next week. If you're still watching this and you haven't hit the like button and gone out and shared the video, please do that, and then go back and hit like on all the past streams too. Share those. Just helpful. I don't know. And yeah, if you guys have questions for the next one, I guess I think what I'll do is I'll post up the next stream long in advance instead of like an hour in advance, so people can drop in questions and other things and all that, and kind of be ready in advance. All right. Yeah, I'll let you guys say goodbye or anything else you want to say before I click the button and kick everybody off.
See you, everybody. It was fun. See you, Jason.
All right. See you out there, everybody. Thanks again for watching. I'm going to hit the button and make it get all weird now.